Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Love First Christians topic study. Today, we're going to be talking about original sin. The concept of that's a little bit complicated, but it is a fun ride. And when I was looking into the concept of original sin, it opened so many other doors. So even if original sin doesn't necessarily grasp you, we're going to be talking about agency. We're going to be talking about sin itself. We're going to be talking about a lot of history, involved with that, Gnosticism. So it should be pretty interesting. There's a lot of discussions to have with that. And we are going to talk about the news a little bit. The big one on social media, obviously, being the UnitedHealthcare assassin. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I got Aaron here because Aaron's my friend and he shows up to these kind of things. How's it going, Aaron?
I'm doing really well.
Good. Cool. Well, let's talk some faith. So, the concept of original sin has always kind of been around in the Bible. It's the fall of Adam, and then everybody else after that has the flaw that he has, right? Like after the Garden of Eden. Sinless in the Garden of Eden, eats the forbidden fruit, gains this fall, and all his kids have this fall with them as well. He did not have the propensity to sin before that, and now he has it now. There is a concept of this called concupiscence, and it is a complicated word, but essentially it just means that you have a hurtful desire within you, that there is not something, it's not something you have to be taught, not something you have to learn, but simply that like you have that desire within you to see somebody come to harm, and even maybe harmful desires for yourself. Aaron, anything you think, at least as far as when we talk about the ground floor Garden of Eden, I think everybody is mostly on the same page there, but is there anything that you have a feeling about or anything you wanted to add to that?
I'm trying to figure out what qualifies as ground floor and what qualifies as starting a new discussion, because there's a lot of different places I thought, like for the first time, I actually did some background reading before we actually started this. But yeah, so I learned about the concept of concupiscence or whatever it is that you're saying. And the fact that the formulation of the idea of original sin didn't exist until the 400s. The early church did not have that concept, and that's interesting to think about. Like the fact that it was a developed idea rather than one that existed directly from Jesus's time. And of course, Jesus himself didn't actually talk about it. It doesn't exist in the New Testament until Romans. Yeah. And it puts the concept of stories like Job in an interesting light. It doesn't talk about how Job was inherently a sinner. He led a quote unquote perfect life. And how could you do that if you have the concept of original sin? And so that I feel like we're going to talk a lot about that tonight.
All those are boxes I definitely want to open. As you mentioned, like really there's three verses that they talk about this. This is Genesis 3, Psalm 51, and Romans 5, where we get this concept of original sin. Obviously, Genesis 3, when we experience the fall of man. Psalm 51, I was brought forth in iniquity, that you're conceived in sin. So you exist in a sinful world. And then Romans 5, where it talks about how all sin enters the world through one man, and death is a consequence of that sin. And because we all die, that's proof that we all still share in that fall. In this way, death came to be to all people because all sinned. So there is a really hurtful way to talk about this. And this is that like babies are born liable for their sin. And if they don't believe in God in time, that if they die in infancy or get aborted or something like that, they suffer from eternal conscious torment in hell. And this is kind of where we get to the concept evolving to a place where it had absolutely never been before and was not understood that way in the Bible. As you mentioned, Aaron, So the person to develop the idea was combating the Gnostics. This is Irenaeus of Lyons. And Irenaeus, his issue with I have issues with Gnosticism as well. I think there's actually some good pull from there, but it deals more with like, it doesn't deal with like sin and salvation so much as like Gnostics, the early Gnostics, and this is actually there in, I believe, Acts, but taught that like Jesus was just a sinner. He was just like a really good guy, like smart guy, but just, like one of us. He would just happen to be like an enlightened one of us. And the goal is to be enlightened like him. I do think there's a goal to be enlightened by him. I also don't think that we should base our entire lives around not sinning. We've talked about this before, that if you just base your life around not sinning, you lock yourself in a closet, you die quietly, congratulations, you didn't sin. The purpose is confronting sin, failing, succeeding, eventually getting better, right? Like, as opposed to just like not sinning. So while I give the Gnostics some bone, I completely understand why the primitive church and them clashed. Is there anything that you found in this time period that I haven't?
So you mentioned, who was it? Aurelius? Who did you say?
Irenaeus.
Irenaeus. Yeah, I run across the name Augustine, being the fact
Augustine
that he
Hippo.
wanted, Augustine, that he wanted to push the idea of infant baptism, which wasn't biblically grounded, and to bolster his argument of infant baptism, he pushed the idea of original sin, and that's how it became part of the public consciousness.
So he is the first person to use the term original sin. It's a little like when we talk about capitalism, like the first people who like invented it didn't use the word. So like we just kind of, it's like out there in the ether, right? Like until somebody like actually uses the word, right? Like for it. And so I talk about Irenaeus because he's the first one to formulate the concept. However, he himself did not name the concept. It was, and Irenaeus, to be clear, is still like 100s, 130, like 280, like still after like the church and everything. And Augustine Hippo was the first person to use the word, like to actually use the phrase original sin. And you're right, he is the one who kind of got together with this like infant baptism kind of thing. And if you think there's like there's not two sides on this, there's 1,000 sides on this, because even the people that are like, oh well, should infants be baptized, does baptism actually change like our ability to do good? Is the baptism the thing that gets rid of original sin, and all of a sudden we don't have that hurtful desire anymore? You and I discussed this on Lamentations just last week. No, it does not. I want to be welcoming of all kinds of opinions on this one, but I find that it would really be hurtful theologically for me to teach that you no longer have that harmful desire inside of you, that sinful nature inside you post baptism. Anything? I mean, you have something to add on that?
Well, yeah, I was wrestling with the idea. I don't know whether or not there was a ulterior motive, or if he was just theologically adamant in this particular aspect of infant baptism. I had a minor theological quarrel with my wife about 3 or 4 months ago, maybe as much as 6 months ago. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I think I know what this is about.
Yeah, she's Catholic, and she wanted to baptize our kids, and I was pretty adamantly against it at first, and I finally came. She kept pressing the point. It was really important to her, and she felt that it was grounded in her faith. And I wonder if it's more cultural than it is theological. But I eventually acquiesced, because I was like, you know what? I don't think there's anything to say that would hurt, and it makes her happy, and I don't see the reason. Like it doesn't. It's not going to hurt them, So we went ahead and initiated the process of getting them baptized in the Catholic faith, and it ended up going well. I didn't really do anything for me anyway, but it made her happy, and then I felt that was fine. But yeah, hearing about the fact that the entire concept of original sin was grounded on the idea not that it was, as you said, not that the idea originally came up, but the fact that it was instituted formally on the basis of infant baptism was really fascinating to me, because I always felt like infant baptism was kind of a anomalous thing that didn't really. I didn't have any. I didn't see any evidence of it in the Bible. So the fact that I found that those two things that were kind of anomalous to me were grounded in the same area was interesting.
Yeah, well, it's where we get infant baptism from. It's important to kind of note that this is where the practice stems from, is that the belief that we have this original sin, and if they are not baptized and they do happen to die in infancy, that we want them to go to heaven, right? And if they have this original sin on them, that they won't go to heaven, right? Like if they're not baptized. There was not, I mentioned there not being a consensus, so I guess this is probably the best time to bring this up, even within the Catholic Church and among some. I mean, we talk about John Calvin, Martin Luther. I'm aware that these are people who kind of clashed a little bit with the Catholic Church, but still on kind of the more. I mean, Martin Luther didn't even want there to be a Protestant Reformation, right? He's just trying to fix the Catholic Church itself. They're still on kind of what we would call, I guess, the conservative side. It doesn't really make sense nowadays, but conservative in the sense that they're not trying to institute rapid changes so much as like tweaks, like little adjustments, you know.
Reformists.
Yeah, right, reformers. And so the Reformation has kind of saw that mankind was completely depraved, and that there is no, like, even after baptism, it's that we are selected, and this is where we get into agency, right? That if mankind has no capacity to do good because we have this original sin, then only God can save us. And it's not like it's even our choice, because see, and this is where we get to that choice thing. If you're completely fallen, you can't choose good. So God would have to give you, like, make you an elect, right? As they say, he would have to predestine you to accept this gift, because you would not accept it on your own. So there's that side, which again, I don't really agree with that. I do believe all good gifts come from God. I do believe that all, like, good things, good intentions, right? Like, all that has a lot to do with the Holy Spirit. But I do believe in agency. And I do believe the ability of ourselves to do something. I do believe God has a plan sometimes. I do believe God can override and tamper with our agency, sure. But ultimately, I do believe that agency was a part of this plan. To me, this is why he has Adam choose the forbidden fruit as opposed to just creating a fallen man, right? Like, Adam got that choice. Eve got that choice. They made that choice. And by that choice, we navigate everything that we have now. God knowing what choices they're going to make, but it's still important to note that that's still agency. Any thoughts you have about agency?
Yeah. So a couple of different ways to understand this, of pre and post fruit, I guess I should say. So pre-fruit, the mainstream narrative seems to be that Adam and Eve were sinless. They were perfect beings in God's image. And then after the fruit, they became capable of sin, and therefore were no longer welcome in the Garden of Eden. And capable of sin doesn't mean that they were depraved beings, as you said, but that they could be, and therefore were no longer welcome, because they were no longer perfect, and they couldn't be in God's direct presence anymore, because God can't abide sin. But it's really challenging to wrap my head around the notion of free will and how it intersects with sin. You know, to what degree can you have free will and not be capable of sin? And to what degree can you have sin and have it interact with your ability to have free will? You know, like, if we were depraved beings, as you said. And then the only way that we could come to God is by God specifically giving that beneficent. What was the term? What's the term I'm looking for? Not benevolence. Do you know what I'm saying?
Not quite. Describe the concept. I should be able to come up with
beneficence, or I don't remember. Whatever the term is. Bestowing that divine intervention, I guess, to us, to make us turn away from sin.
Are you talking about predestination? Is that what you're going for?
Well, somewhat.
Okay.
I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, because I mean, this all goes along with stuff like in the Old Testament of turning Pharaoh's heart to stone, where it almost like, because of the connection that Moses had with the Pharaoh, there is a really solid position for the Pharaoh to bend. And, he has this brother who's hurting him, and he has the capacity to meet his brother halfway, but God turns his heart to stone, because it serves the greater narrative of getting the Jews out of Egypt. And to what degree, when God's tampering with people, is he interfering with their free will? Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to think about. And ultimately, God's in control. God knows everything. So the thing is God knowing the choices we're going to make doesn't necessarily get rid of free will. However, there are some, when we talk about election. So this comes down to like the Augustinian theory versus foreknowledge, right? So one is foreknowledge that you have within yourself, like within you, this desire for that faith or to become better. And that would mean that you are part of the elect. In Augustinian, God's just like you right there, right? Like you're going to be the guy, kind of like Paul, right? Like, I see you killing people. Nah, you're not going to do it anymore. You're going to do what I want you to do. And that this is, so it's basically, are you the one who chooses this, or is God the one that chooses this?
I can't. I want to get your thoughts on which one you fall down on, but I don't feel like there's a possibility for there to be a just God if you can't make that choice yourself. Like if you're randomly selected as one of the good ones, and then you've got two family members that you love dearly that aren't randomly selected to be one of the good ones, well, that sucks. Like I want to be with my family members in the afterlife. And the idea that they're just damned,
right,
that sucks.
And forget that I love them. Doesn't God love them? Like
right.
we're told, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
like, I mean, even if I'm having a falling out with him, you think God loves his own creation, right? As we're taught. I firmly fall. I'm trying to be as fair as I can. I firmly fall on the agency side of this. And I think this is partly like, I think given the immense theocratic work both sides have, all I have to fall back on, given that both sides make some occasionally good points and quote good scriptures and everything like that, is simply practice. I have seen people make the choice, right? Like it is simply that I feel within myself when I choose God that I have that choice. I know that I would be able to reject God if I want to. Like I feel that within myself, that if I woke up and decided to not be a Christian, I would be capable of doing that. If I were presented with a certain reason or a certain, if I saw something or whatever, like I know that something would happen that could make me not believe in God. And I know that things happen that do make me believe in God. And
well, you mentioned that you were
to make that choice. Yeah.
You mentioned that you were trying to be neutral.
Yeah.
What is the steel man loving God answer to the idea that God handpicks individuals and that everybody else is just SOL?
Sure. So yeah, a lot of this is in the tulip model. This is like where we get into hardcore kind of like Calvinism. And Calvin, for all the reputation that he gets, some of it earned, but isn't completely devoid of like empathy or anything like that. He's just reading that like some people are chosen. The steel man argument is that the people who are not selected, when God talks about how he made us of clay, and sometimes he just made some pharaohs, right? Like in Esau's, are the two that are quoted in the scriptures that God made poorly on purpose for the reason that they sin, for the reason that they make God's glory come to pass, right? Like that God made bad people so that we could see this like fight between good people, like, and have the good people improve and become stronger. So the idea is that the bad people that we lose, there's nothing lost. We shouldn't mourn that because God made them poor. They are bad people. And so that these are souls of bad people. And we shouldn't be like, oh, but I love them dearly. It's like, well, you shouldn't. Why would you love like Pharaoh, right? Like, or in some cases, like we'll get to later, why would you love Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, right? Like this is somebody who God made poorly, and the idea is that we shouldn't mourn somebody like that's, death, demise. Their role in this world was to make things difficult for other people. They accomplished their goal. Now they're burning in hell, and we shouldn't mourn at all. And then when we have, stop. Sorry, the doggy's barking at me. Well, barking at something. So when we have this world, and we have like if a kid that dies in like infancy, and we're supposed to be, it's like, well, don't be sad. Like God made a flawed vessel. You don't know if that vessel was going to be the next Timothy McVeigh, right? Like God knows. So there's no point in mourning this sorrow. The other issue is if you even have the capacity within you to ask this question, that you are part of the elect, right? That you have been selected. If you even have the capacity to wrestle with this moral quandary, then you have been one of the ones that has been enlightened, that God has selected you, because you find yourself being able to be like, well, I want these good things to happen, So that's the steelman argument as best.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That is absolutely horrific. Like, first of all, that's absolutely like just vile position. But also it makes it super easy to understand why there's a perceived lack of empathy among a lot of people. If they believe that, like they wholeheartedly believe that, it makes perfect sense why they wouldn't care about, suffering, because they could just immediately rationalize it as, well, they're just not one of the good ones,
right?
And it has so much carryover to how they enact public policy and legislation, because
sure,
why would you care about one of the people that aren't good? Like why do prisoners need to have air conditioning in the prison during the summer? Because they're obviously the bad people. We're just waiting for them to hurry up and shuffle off the mortal coil.
Right. These people in Haiti are not part of the elect, right? Like they are, we should do our best to witness to them. But in this worldview that they would not be part of the elect, and their deaths are not something that we should really mourn so much as mourn the idea that, I wish there were more elect in the world. But yeah, it's for obvious reasons, I can't really endorse it. Not only is it kind of horrifying philosophically, and I try. I actually like a lot of Calvinism, but this is just one of those things that I just say. Not only is it something that if there is 50% evidence for one side, 50% for the other, if these two sides can go verse for verse talking about the elect or not the elect, then what I'm come down to is I bring it back. I know I said this already, but personal experience, like just that idea that I have seen people make decisions, make choices different than mine. And they I'm in control of my soul, but they're not in control of theirs. The idea that there are people like that, just psychologically, we don't have any argument for that, right? Like there is no evidence that some people are just incapable of making choices.
It's the NPC position.
Right.
Like I'm a player character and you're an NPC, and you have set dialogue trees that you just go down and you don't think for yourself. And it's such a narcissistic way to view people. You're positioning yourself as the hero of the story, and none of us are the hero of any story. We're just people.
And severely dehumanizing. What you said. Just there's not a good. You would have to prove that these people are not capable or are inhuman, right? And they they're just psychologically. There's no
go around administering Turing tests on people and stuff.
Exactly.
Like a theological Turing test.
Right. And I mean, atheists would see this in like the whole Sam Harris model, right? Like that some people just have no, some people are made this way, some people made that way. Neither one's able to choose. And so we might as well just, do our best. And I think the funny thing is study after study, and Sam Harris will even talk about this, that the belief in free will makes us better people. So even though he doesn't believe in free will, he understands that the belief in free will makes us better people. Well, if we talk about fruits of the tree, then if the fruit is good, then the root is good, right? Like why is this lie the one thing in science that's like bad? Like it'd be like we understand gravity, but it's really bad for us to believe in gravity. Like, no, that's what helps the world go round. That's what enables all this science, right? Like is understanding of the truth. So why is it we suddenly decide to make an exception and then just say like, well, let's pretend people don't have this agency, or let's say I actually believe people don't have this agency, but I need to treat them like they have this agency. It doesn't make sense. It's like saying, well, I believe the two poles of the magnet are both positive, but they behave as a magnet should when a positive and a negative come together. And so I just treat them like they have a positive, negative pole. But I believe personally that they both have positive poles. It's like, well, it's just not true, right? Like at what point do we just kind of say your scientific accuracy is just, it's wrong, right? Like I have done so much when I worked in the hospital and we looked at like neurology. Just watching some people have one cigarette and they like get hooked like for life and they're not quitting, and some people have done it their whole lives and they quit. Neurologically, oh man, I can't believe I'm going down this, but it's worth it. There's this idea called neurological erosion. So when you see water on the side of like on a rainy day on the side of a dirt hill, if you've lived indoors your whole life, you may never have witnessed this phenomenon, but we Boy Scouts see this, right? That once water starts coming down the hill in one place, the water is more likely to come down the hill in that place. And it's not like the water chooses. So like the anti-free will activists would be like, this is why you constantly make the same choices day after day, right? Like once you start making that choice, it's there. Something like cannabis, for example, weakens your neurological erosion. So it makes it so that your brain is more likely to follow other paths. Using this idea of erosion, think of it as a dirt path, but you fill in the dirt on the one valley area that the water has created, right? And so now you're less likely to just automatically take that path. The water's looking for a way down the mountain. It'll find a different path down. Cannabis kind of helps take that away. Now, some erosion's good, right? Like a 1 + 1 = 2. That's neurological erosion in your mind. However, you have a great deal of evidence that makes that accurate. You know what I mean? Like if I have one pen and another pen, I have two pens, right? This is consistent. I should probably pull out a second pen for the sake of this analogy. Here we go, 2 pens. And so that being automatic is a good thing, right? Like that kind of erosion is a good thing. The thing is I have just witnessed somebody who has deep erosion to say you should keep smoking. And to watch that water go back uphill, like I have seen it happen. And I understand, like, I don't really love the term free agency because the truth is that we're all influenced by something, right? There are forces that want us to keep smoking. So it's not free. I can't just suddenly wake up and say, I feel like flying today, right? And just making that happen. I have to do something. I have to get in a plane, right? I have to purchase the ticket. I have to earn the money to buy that ticket, right? Like there are things in the way that make that agency costly. There's like a price to this agency, right? But I've seen people pay that price and they go up that mountain despite their neurons. And you can see this on a graph, like their neurons being like smoke, smoke, smoke. And they are using their will to stop that from happening. Whereas you see somebody else whose neurons are much weaker for that, just kind of be like, I know it's probably not good for me, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right. Like, and I know there's a lot of factors here, and I know that the anti-free will, like, people have explanations for this as much as they can. But what it comes down to is just the fact that that exists and that they acknowledge that people are better off when they believe in free will and agency. Just means that this is really not, that's probably what it is. You know what I mean? We have it in Christianity. We have evidence for it. We have evidence in the real world. I just don't get the point why it almost seems like you would want to not believe in it to make that happen. And why would you not want to not believe in it? Why do you want these people to be NPCs to use what you said there?
Yeah.
I've gone off, but go ahead. Any concluding thoughts about agency? I feel very strongly about this issue.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that I was running across this as I was reading was, what is the point of the Genesis story as it pertains to the time that Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden and then ate the fruit and then had to leave the Garden of Eden? Why didn't God just start us off? I have created you. You are my creation, but you are not a perfect, and therefore you can no longer be in my presence. Why not just start us in that position rather than having that initial period of time that we spent with God?
I think wanting it to be humanity's choice from the beginning, right? Like letting choice be a choice, so to speak. You know what I mean? That you can maintain this, the state of Adam, right? Pure innocence, pure, no knowledge, right? Like naming animals and thinking everything's hunky-dory and everything's perfect. And it's like, this is here if you want it. And like I said, God knows he'll choose it. But that's just like the fact that like humanity's choice was our choice as well as God's choice. I think there's kind of a beauty in that, like to letting it be our choice as opposed to just being like I'm making you flawed and so it is. Because as you mentioned, as we've gone over, God has no problem making people flawed. He talks about it, right? So why not just give us that original sin from the get-go?
Well, I guess my follow-up question to that is, if you're sinless, if you're truly innocent, and then you're making the decision to allow yourself to be capable of sin, isn't that sin? Like, isn't the decision to open yourself up to sin a sinful decision?
So what was their motivation for choosing it? Was this sin or a flaw? Certainly they were doing something God told them not to do, right? God's like, hey, don't eat of that tree because you'll die if you do, which ends up being true. It's funny because the serpent, well, for all the truths he shares, says, no, you'll live forever. Well, not quite, right? Like this is, but it does give them the knowledge of good and evil, right? Like, which is something that ultimately God wanted us to have. So yeah, this choice was like, are we flawed to even be able to make that choice to say no to what God says? I think the thing is we're kind of rudderless. Like at that point, if we have no knowledge of good or evil, then even God saying, don't eat this, is it evil for me to break that request of his, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I have no knowledge of it being good or evil. I have two entities, one telling me don't eat it, the other telling me do eat it. Like if I have no knowledge of good or evil, it's like having two parents like that say different things. Is it evil for me to choose one of those parents?
Well, because I was going to say, you're not even capable. You're entirely credulous. You have no inhibition. I mean, literally in any capacity So why wouldn't you? And that, that also takes you to, who is the serpent? Like, because it's not, the serpent is never named. A lot of people call it Satan, but the serpent's never named as Satan. Is God the serpent also? Like, if is God leading them down the predestination? You have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I do believe the serpent represents like the devil. Now, so full on. This is an allegory. It was recognized as an allegory when we wrote it. The idea that there is, I do believe in creationism. So I will say, a lot of times people talk about it being an allegory. They get into the weeds on evolution. I believe in adaptation. Evolution's kind of a complicated story. I don't believe that human beings evolved from monkeys. I don't believe in like single origins, stuff like that. But I do believe that this is a parable to help us understand it. It uses a parable that was already in existence at the time this was written down, similar to how the child placed into the wicker basket is like, that's the Epic of Gilgamesh, and somebody else finds it and raises it their own, right? Like, the Bible borrows from these stories. The Leviathan and Job is from Canaanite mythology. Like, there's a ton of stories in the Bible that are borrowed. A lot of people think that this would discredit the Bible. In reality, God is just trying to speak to us in a way that we understand. People that use this Garden of Eden story, it made a lot of sense to those people who are familiar with this parable that existed in other societies already at this time period. This is why when we get too technical about it, things start to break down. Did they have kids by doing their mom? How was there a whole other city when Cain was cast out if these were the only people in the world? This, that, and the other. It was not meant to be taken as a literal story, simply as an allegory to help us understand. As you're kind of noting here, Aaron, still kind of complicated, right? Like, if it's supposed to be an allegory to help us understand, still very difficult for us to understand a little bit, right? And maybe that just goes to how difficult this setup is. The if God, why evil? If good, why evil? Question is an eternal one. And it's difficult even when we have stories like this, when we talk about, introduce things like agency and sin and good decisions and bad decisions and obedience, and is what Adam did a good thing. I mean, he's sainted in most churches, right? Like, Adam and Eve are venerated leaders. Generally, Christians have tended to recognize as Adam and Eve as making the right decision here, despite it, like, God sounding very cheesed and giving them a bunch of curses after they do this kind of thing, that this was always the plan, and that they perhaps made the correct decision when they did this. That this was all along the idea, the concept, the things that we wanted to do.
It feels almost, to create a being that is incapable of discerning good and evil, and then putting them in a situation either directly or indirectly, it feels like it's one of those videos where you have like a 3-year-old or something like that, and you put a plate of marshmallows in front of them and say, all right, I'm going to step out of the room. Don't touch the marshmallows. And then like, it feels like an unfair test.
Correct.
They don't even have the capacity to resist. I don't know.
Ron says, hey. I say, hey, Ron. How's it going, Ron? Yeah, it's not a fair test. It's not one that they were supposed to pass. A lot of Christians have kind of colloquially the thank goodness that life isn't fair kind of thing, right? Like, and yeah, life is not going to be fair sometimes. This was not supposed to be. I ran a D&D campaign just 2 days ago, and in it, the book explicitly tells me in this hedge maze. So it's a magical hedge maze, and they're all stuck with it, right? And going left and right. And there's these like clues from the sundial, but the clues are so esoteric and abstract. Like, they are not, you wouldn't know to go like where it says to go from the direction like the dial is pointing. And the idea is they're supposed to get lost in there forever. The bad guy in this thing, or it's actually not a bad guy, but the people keeping them out of the tower don't want you to figure out. They're not there to give you like a little fun intellectual game for you to figure out. You know, that they want you out, right? They do not want you in this tower. So the clues that the players got, they're frustrated, right? And some of it comes across as frustration at me as the DM, right? Like, like this is not fair. If this sounds not fun to you, I will say I was running an official published adventure. This was not my idea. So in case you're like, boy, this guy sounds like a terrible DM, right? Like, this is not my idea, but I understood what they were going for. This person didn't want you to figure it out. They want you wandering around in the hedge maze forever, right? Now, I don't want to say that God never wants us to figure it out. However, I do want to say there is like a reason for it, right? I look at Revelation, another book that you and I talked about recently. We're not supposed to know the day and time and exact moment this whole thing ends, right? The goal is not perfect knowledge and knowing everything. The goal is understanding it enough to at least say, hey, I better prepare myself, get my spirit in order, heal my friends, love your neighbors and you fulfilled all the law, right? Like this is the goal, right? So why does God not provide us specifics here? Well, that's not really the goal, right? Especially when we talk about theology. I'm not saying theology is here to teach you mistruths. In fact, I would say it's exactly the opposite. Faith is the evidence of things unseen, as opposed to just things unseen, right? Like, it's not the fact that you don't see them, it's the evidence of those things unseen. So the evidence of this story in the Bible is not me finding the bones of Adam and locating the exact location of the Garden of Eden and everything like people try to do. The evidence of these things unseen is agency in our lives, right? Like decisions. Aaron, when you make a choice, when I make a choice, right? Like, this is the practical application of this, as opposed to just like, oh, let's make sure you have all the dates and details down and everything like that. Otherwise, the Bible would be so long that nobody would ever read it. And we would never get like the exact, bits down. God gives us enough to give us what we need, what he feels we need, the information that we should have. And that's it. And I understand people like you and I, Aaron, love more information. We love details, right? I'm not going to get upset if you J.R.R. Tolkien me, right? Like, I'm okay with more information. But we do got to understand the tree branch is a big derailer for a lot of people who read J.R.R. Tolkien. And the Bible is written for everybody, not just for Hody Johns and not just for Aaron. I would say if you're passionate about this subject, I could go off longer about this. I mean, we're still not done talking about original sin, by the way, but I could go off longer talking about the Garden of Eden and agency, like all the studying that I did in school for it and everything. But this is something that the reason you're not getting more information in the Bible is because maybe if you're passionate about it, this is some way that the Holy Spirit is speaking to you specifically and not to everybody. And the Bible is more what God wants everybody to know. Whereas, the Holy Spirit tells you what you need to know. And maybe that need to know, like I said, maybe it's more about the Garden of Eden. Maybe it's more about agency. There's so much more studying to do here. And I'm not against having a whole session about the Garden of Eden and agency and everything like that, because there's so much to explore. But if I'm trying to keep it broad at all, then I would probably do what God did. Give us kind of a baseline story and just be like, the point isn't looking back. The point is using your agency, healing other people, right? Like, what do we do with this agency? Right off the bat, what happens with this agency between Cain and Abel, right? Like, am I my brother's keeper? That first question. How many Christians do you know, Aaron, who get the answer to that question wrong, right? Like, that's the moral of the story is what I need you to take away from me. If you read Aesop's fables and you're just like, I want to know the exact name of the fox, I'm not sure you understand the fable, right? Like the purpose of the fable, you know what I mean? Hopefully that answers your question by literally not answering the question.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's see here. Boy, okay. Agency, Garden of Eden. Okay. That's how it kind of gets instituted. We talked about the Augustinian view, the no agency view, the total depravity view, which is the counter view by Martin Luther and John Calvin. and then and really, so baptism gets mixed into this because we just say there actually was the Catholic Church does actually have something that teaches that by imparting the life of Christ, this is actually from the Wikipedia, right? Baptism by imparting the life of Christ's grace erases original sin and turns a man back towards God. But the consequences for nature, weakened and inclined to evil, persist in man and summon him to spiritual battle. So this is kind of the halfway thing, right? That like you're still bad, but at least you're going in God's direction as opposed to going away from God's direction. Again, Aaron, I agree with you here that it's like, does it though? Because wouldn't we see an observable difference in children who are baptized and children who are not? Right? Like you would just say like this one is inclined to do good, they mess up sometimes, versus this one is completely evil. But
well, every single time that I've ever engaged with baptism as a concept, it's been something that you're making the conscious choice to do because you want to better yourself and you want to be more engaged with God. Mm-hmm. But the idea of an infant baptism or even a young child, they're not old enough to make that conscious choice. And imposing that upon them, even if it's a positive imposition, it doesn't feel like it merits the point of baptism in the first place. You know,
when we talk about it, continue, because I think you're making the point that I'm about to make here.
Well, yeah, it's just the whole point of baptism is to consciously choose to further your development with Christ. And you can't make that conscious choice as an infant.
Exactly. I think here's the thing about child baptism and everything. No, you know, we consider fully informed consent. We talk about this a lot, right? Like we like to talk about fully informed consent because it's a good thing to have. The thing is, there's so much information in the universe that our brains would explode if we tried to fit it all in there, right? As many neurons as we got, we just don't have enough in there to know everything. And so we're never going to have this fully informed consent that we would like, right? When we make this agency, because that would involve knowing everything. And at that point, God is a matter of knowledge as opposed to a matter of a life choice, right? Like it's just a matter of, I know he exists. I want to go to heaven. Therefore, I believe in God, which is unfortunately how some even younger kids or even teenagers or even adults come to God. We want to go to heaven, and this is why we choose this life, right? As opposed to, what does God say when everybody's looking up? He's like, look around. The reason you dedicate your life to God is to dedicate your life to your fellow man. The reason God knows your heart. The reason you baptize yourself is you saying, I'm making a covenant, not just with God, but with you people, right? To say that I'm doing this because I dedicate my life in service to humanity, right? To human beings. When we make that decision to be baptized. Huge decision. Right? Like huge. And so giving it to a child to try and like make it about sin it misses the mark on what baptism is. This is not, I felt no differently about sin and all the usual sins, right? Lust, greed, envy, pride, gluttony, sloth. I felt no different before or after my baptism. That doesn't mean it didn't take. I feel differently now than I did like 20 years ago. I feel differently now than I did about those things 5 years ago because I'm growing towards God. But it's not like the baptism was a catalyst that led to that. The reason there's so much controversy about this is because even baptism itself is part of that catalyst, right? Like I realize I want to do good, so I choose baptism, making a commitment, a covenant with other people that I will do good, and then I continue to do good, right? That's part of the journey, as opposed to just like, I can't do good, better get baptized so that I finally can. Like, it is not practically true, and it is not biblically true. I know I'm talking about it only because it is a belief that, and I want to say is kind of dead because nobody preaches about it like this anymore. But as you kind of mentioned, Aaron, there's a lot of people that secretly feel this way deep down. They're a PC. Everybody else is NPCs. God has compassion on whom he will have compassion on. He has compassion on me. He has no compassion on the people of Haiti. And that's cool.
It's funny that you keep mentioning Haiti, and that, because it's very easy to fall into this idea of, why is it disproportionately white people who are the PCs? Well, it must be that white people are just inherently predisposed to being PCs. I guess it's just predestination. I'm not racist. It's just reality as it is. And then you get into these, you start justifying imperialism, and you start justifying racism. And yeah.
So I read this book called The Myth of Race, highly recommended to anybody who thinks that race has anything to do with IQ or talent or anything like that. And before we're even really developing the scientific method, the Catholics were just like, hang on, I have not seen them do anything like that they can't learn. They whereas the world, it's funny because the government was actually the one who because they wanted to use these people as slaves and everything. And the Catholic Church was like, we've sent missionaries there and we're learning their language. They're not speaking in ooga boogas. They have a language. We are learning to speak it. And when we learn to speak it, we realize they have the complexity of thought just like everybody else has. Right. And so it's funny that the Catholics were actually a huge influence against this idea that some people just aren't cut out for it, because they were the ones who kind of discovered, again, kinetically. They went out there just for the sake of being like, I guess we have to save men's souls. But they were the ones who were like, guys, what you're teaching here is not true. And as you had all these monarchies that were just like, we will come down hard on you guys if you start treating them like people. Right. That you had this Catholic Church that was in opposition to that.
It's the division between people who genuinely believe in their faith and the people who use their faith as a political tool. And we still have that today.
Right. It's observational. It is just like you said, is your faith guiding you through this life, or is your faith removing you from this life and putting you on some different path? You know what I mean? They're no longer of the world when they say be in, or they're no longer in the world. Sorry.
Right.
We're supposed to be in the world, not of the world. We're not of the world, we as Christians. We don't behave on this I wanted revenge, so I got it, or I hate people, and or I wanted that kid's lollipop, so I took it. Right? We recognize that there's something morally that we just kind of say yes, even though I want that, it's theirs and they should have it. Right? We're not in the world in that sense, or we're not of the world in that sense. I keep flipping this up. We are very much in the world, though, right?
I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
But there's a problem. The problem is that a lot of Christians are very much so. I now you got me confused as to whether or not in the world or of the world.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. It is in the world, not of the world. That is my bad. Right.
Yeah.
What's the opening epistle that Paul has where he says nothing gives me more joy than that you walk in the truth? I forget which one it is, but it's right off the bat. But I'll look it up one of these times while you're talking. But the truth is God is in the truth, right? Rejoice in the truth. This is, what is God? God is love. What is love? Love is patient. Love is kind. I mean, love is all about the truth, right? Love rejoices in the truth. And so when you have this realization that these people are people who have the thoughts and feelings that you have, or if they don't, except that maybe that they can, they've just been beaten, right? When we see
3 John.
When we see a dog in the streets, it's 3 John. Thank you. Yeah. When we see a dog in the streets, so it's not even Paul then. I just got it wrong. Okay. Sometimes I get things wrong. There you go. Fallen man. When you see a dog in the streets and you see it snarling at people, you'll see videos that slow this down, play sad music, because when we see this happen with a dog, we recognize that something bad has happened in that dog's life. Right? Something has turned them to a point where they're snarling at even helping hands that would try to heal them, right? To try to rescue them. We have compassion and feel sad about it. We do videos. What happens when we see a human being that it lashes out, snarling, angry?
Like, say, a
right?
homeless black man in a subway who's telling these people he's going to shoot people.
Right.
Um,
What do you see?
to pull another topical issue.
Important topic. I
Yeah.
mean, what do we see? Like, do we see somebody? Do we slow down the music? Do we play a violin? Do we feel sad? Do we try to fight through those defenses and get healing to them anyhow? Or do
Well, a
we
lot of people see a
just say,
threat that needs to be eliminated.
NPC? Yep, it's a threat. This guy, he'd done it 100 times before. He had it coming to him.
Yeah.
If we all got what was coming to us, we'd all be in hell. That's in the Bible. So let's maybe not try to give everybody what's coming to them. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's getting to a current event, but I mean, why not talk about it? Yeah. Aaron, do you want to talk about that? Like, give people some groundwork for the issue that we're talking about here.
Yeah, so basically there's this homeless man. He's got a lot of mental issues and he's had a lot of problems. This isn't the first time that he's engaged in this sort of behavior. And he's on the subway and he is telling the passengers and yelling at the passengers that he's got a gun and that he's going to shoot people. And there's no apparent gun, but obviously he's got a lot of people spooked. And so after he starts yelling at people, and people get nervous, and several of them band together and they tackle him and bring him to the ground. And one of the people who is in the scuffle is a white. The guy's black, and one of the guys that's bringing him down is a white Marine veteran. And he puts the guy in a chokehold and proceeds to choke him until he's unconscious. And then he's told multiple times, "Hey, man, your chokehold's pretty strong there. You might want to back off." And he continues to keep him in the chokehold. And eventually the man is found dead. And he was charged with negligent homicide and was just found not guilty by the court.
So the man who died, his name is Jordan Neely, and the guy who killed him is Daniel Penny. And so we have Neely, who was mentally ill. Like, I think the trouble that we have, especially when we view things through a legal system, is everything's like, it's a verdict, right? It's one way or the other, innocent or guilty, or not. I'm sorry, guilty or not guilty, I guess more accurately. And we tend to look at things like, was it just, was it right? Well, from a legal perspective, like, I can understand you don't want to prosecute somebody or something. But we're viewing things from a Christian perspective here, right? Like, and this is where all of a sudden we can become deeply hurt by what happened. Is you might be able to say, like, well, I don't want the government making these decisions or whatever. That's whatever, right? Like, that's the government. But bottom line is, there was a guy who was harassing people on the subway, even in the trial. He had been doing it for a long time, right? Like, this was a guy who was displaying all the help me signs, and nobody helped him, right? Like, we just kept going on the subway. This guy kept bothering people, harassing
bystander
people.
effect.
Really
Nobody wants to get involved until they're forced to get involved. And I think that there's a genuine ethical argument that if he's saying he has a gun and that he's going to shoot people, you put that man down, in the sense that you incapacitate him so that he cannot hurt anyone. Like, you don't want to wait to find out if he has a gun and he's willing to actually shoot people.
Right.
But the issue is, okay, you've got him incapacitated. He stopped struggling because he just fell unconscious, and you continue to hold him in a chokehold for several more minutes.
Right.
Like, that's not justifiable at all. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you could even, like, other than just absolute contempt of homeless people, of mentally ill people, of black people, I don't understand how you could continue to justify putting somebody in a chokehold long past the point which they've already fallen unconscious. I don't understand it.
Yeah. I mean, somebody tells you, this is similar to kind of the George Floyd thing, right? Where, like, everybody's like, stop it. And the one bystander who says he's dying, let him go, right? Kind of thing. And you just keep holding them.
Yeah.
And like you said, like, I don't want to make you, like, choose who you love. And this is where I want to make sure not to be binary about it, because I think situations like this are exactly why we have the Holy Spirit with us, right? Like, to use in this kind of situation, to let it flow. Because this is a guy who's houseless, and amongst to like kind of the violent threats, he's asking for food, right? Like he's talking, stop making his rent because prices got too high, right? Like, and the services for the homeless had been stripped, especially like COVID and then post-COVID, right? Like these services had just been shut down. And some of this he's talking about directly. Now, he's not educated enough to know exactly why these are happening. All he knows is one day the kitchen he goes to is closed, right? Like one day the shelter he goes to, which always gave him a place to sleep, is no longer taking him, like, and this is, again, like we just let this guy die. But I mean, it's funny because they say, oh, he got strangled over the course of 6 minutes, but we let this guy die over the course of 6 years. From a Christian perspective, we let this guy die for a long time. And it culminated into this. And regardless of what you think of the exact event, like something should have been done about this beforehand, right? Like somebody should have stepped in, gotten this guy the help that he needed before it came down to this. And the fact that it came down to this is really sad. And like you said, when it came down to this, there's no explanation for why you don't need to do that. The thing is, from a legal perspective, you may have a legal right to do it, but it doesn't make it right. You have a legal right to shoot somebody walking on your lawn, right? Like, I don't want to advocate for a society that it's like your property is not yours. And so from a legal standpoint, I understand why you have a right to shoot somebody that's walking on your lawn. But from a Christian perspective, from a moral perspective, that is wrong, right? Like, even if they are maliciously walking on your lawn, don't shoot them, right? Like, this is not the society that I want to live in, right? Like, I want to live in a place where people walking across lawns get set straight, understand people's, right to their personal property, right to own what they want to own, right? Like, but also like that we have this forgiveness and this understanding here, like to be like, yeah, like maybe they're hurting. Maybe there's something you don't see. Maybe there's some way you could help. Right? Like, instead of being how it is. I remember there was this one, it went viral. It was one of those like Dear Ann anonymous, like, newspaper letters, but like, Dear Ann, the way in between the main road and the school goes like through my yard, and kids are always walking on the side of my yard. And I just closed it off one day, and now everybody hates me. And it's like, and with a fence or whatever. And I'm trying to make it up to them now, but they're like, they hate me for like being like, hey, I'm not gonna let you kids like walk across my lawn and everything. I don't want to say that you deserve the hate. I get that your property is yours when you purchased it, but can you find it within yourself to like help the community? Like, it's a good thing. I don't want to make government, like I said, this is not government. I don't want to mandate people doing good things, but from a moral perspective, you should be doing a good thing. You should be being like, oh, yeah, kids, they want to walk from school to here, and my house is right there. Let me make you a pathway, right? Like, this is what ultimately, like, she ended up trying to do to compensate for the earlier mistake, is like, make a pathway, make it easy, right? Like, encourage them, help them. And yes, that's sacrifice, but that's Christianity. Like, Jesus gave it all. I'm just asking you to give some, right? Like, we're of course supposed to give it all, right? But nobody's as good as Jesus. So just give what you can, Can you give this small part of your yard to the kids? You can, right? Like, and this is why I love talking. This is why I stopped talking about politics and started talking about culture. This is why I stopped politics and I got more into my faith. Because ultimately, I'm not interested in the argument of like, should I be compelled? Should I be forced to do the right thing? Like, I'm not trying to compel anybody, but you should feel some like spiritual compulsion to do the right thing. I don't want a legal compulsion, I guess I should say.
Right.
But I want a spiritual compulsion. I want a world where you feel connected to Jordan Neely, not I'm a PC and he's an NPC.
Yeah.
And I guess I kind of got sidetracked from the original sin talk.
No.
I think that you're right, Aaron, that this is kind of the result of that sort of thinking. I'm God's chosen. It's my destiny to manifest. It's not their destiny. I don't know. Just really,
it makes it very, very, very easy to just disregard people. Like, if you follow that mindset to its logical conclusion, there's absolutely no reason to show people empathy at all, because you could just make snap judgments that are very often based in class and race coding, Do they look respectable by the concepts of what I consider to be respectable? Well, then they're clearly a PC. If they don't look respectable, then they're clearly an NPC, and I can just disregard them. They don't even have moral worth. Yeah.
Yeah. So St. Thomas Aquinas, in opposition to this original sin theory that the Augustinians put forward, all I had more on this was just that while it is there in concept, a lot of the people who wrote it down, there was not agreement even within the original sin community, like we talked about. But there also wasn't like consensus in the whole, like as a whole, the Christian community on this. We recognize that there is some part about it that it is true, that I don't have to teach a child to commit a sin for them to steal, lie, cheat, whatever. There's something within us that sees no beef with that, right? But at the same time, we need to do a good job, not just saying like, oh, that's their original sin and now they're going to hell. Like this is of understanding that like, this is the world that we live in. I mean, there's a lot of people that belong in hell. I mean, the criminal on the cross, like all he does is ask Jesus to remember him, and Jesus says he's saved, right? Like this is not a guy who in any way did any amount of repentance, but this is somebody who Christ has mercy on, right? And like we need to understand that mercy extends to people who what Christ says, I died for you while you were still in sin. This isn't just like a post-sin, oh, you accepted my baptism, now I died for you.
Tangent.
Died for you while you're still in that sin. Yeah, go ahead.
Tangent for you real quickly on that specific, on the prisoner, on the man on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that God or that Jesus saved him because as a man, as a human being who was suffering, he could so greatly empathize with that other person who was also suffering? Or do you believe that he did it as an analogy for us reading the Bible to empathize with people in our? I mean, obviously it doesn't have to be. It could be both. But
I was gonna say both. Yeah.
Yeah. Which do you think that like it leans more towards?
Yeah, from a theocratic standpoint, I love this story because this is somebody we say criminal to be kind. This is very likely a murderer on the cross. We don't know their exact names. But generally, if you crucified people outside of Jesus, you were crucifying murderers. So if Jesus is going to get crucified with anybody, unless these were also like fellow believers or something, which they're not, like we're already told that there is no real reason for outside of murder for them to be up there. So the crimes that these two committed were bad, right? In fact, probably particularly bad, because the reason they wanted to stick Jesus in the middle of them is Pilate was trying to make a point. Like, here you guys are. I could talk about Pilate forever. This is somebody I have like a lot of knowledge about from school, and like I really took an interest in like the Roman occupation of what was happening here. But essentially, Pilate's job. I'm not trying to like lionize or demonize him. He's trying to keep things quiet in the region, keep the taxes flowing, right? Like this. Make everything calm as much as it can, right? And obviously this was distinctive not calmness, right? Like a lot of the leadership was like, we're going to make things not calm for you, right? And Pilate wants this to be the last time this ever happens. Pilate is unfortunately wrong, but fortunately from a Christian perspective, unfortunately for himself, he's wrong. But the idea is you put him next to particularly heinous people and make people go like, maybe we shouldn't be killing visionaries, right? Like, because that guy is really evil and that guy is really evil. This is the whole reason he put King of the Jews above his head, right? Like, is this really sedition, right? Like, this broken, innocent, tried to heal people, miracle worker, was this worth killing him for, right? Like, let's not do this again is kind of what Pilate's trying to demonstrate. So Pilate is actually attempting to demonstrate how unfair it is. And this is why Christ is crucified with two other people. To be like, here's a murderer, and here's Jesus, right? Like extreme healer over here. So from a Christian perspective, I love this theologically, that Jesus is right there and like with the criminal next to him or with the murderer next to him. It's like, listen, you can be saved right now. You regret what you did, right? Like, I regret I did. Like, and this guy, says, hey, there's a moment before this where the guy's like, hey, if you're Jesus, you can save us all right now. Like, get us all down. Let's get out of here. And this guy's like, dude, stop tormenting him, right? Like, more than he's already been tormented. He didn't do anything wrong. We deserved it. Something, we deserve what happened to us. And Jesus is like, hey, listen, today you're going to be with me in paradise. Now, we don't have the reason for that. Is it because he stuck his neck out for Jesus, right? Like, is it because, like, he's just like, hey, don't pick on him? Well, Jesus at that moment is indeed the least of these. This murderer is not a believer by any stretch of the imagination, right? But How is it our belief isn't expressed? It's how we treat the least of these. We look at Arthur Morgan from Red Dead 2. This is another example we've happened again. We root for his redemption, despite what he did being irredeemable, right? Like, I never want to make it sound like what he did was okay, but we still root for this change in his soul, even if it only helps like 2 or 3 people after he killed hundreds or thousands, depending on how you played the game, yeah. Bad guy, but you still root for their redemption. And this is one of the beauty of that story is similar to the beauty here, that Jesus roots for your redemption. He sees you, supreme bad guy, as you see Arthur Morgan, right? Like how you see this guy who probably shouldn't be redeemable in the eyes of the world, but you see him in this light that just makes you go, oh, these are the influences on his life. These are the people that got to him. This is the age at which people began to indoctrinate him. This is him trying to shake out of that indoctrination. This is him turning around at the very end, just being like, I know it doesn't make up for what I did, right? Like, I'm a murderer. Nothing I did is going to make up for it. But could you stop picking on that guy for a second, right? Like, let's take our lumps and stop picking on that guy. And ultimately, this is right in line with the parable of the sheep and the goats. You have a bunch of believers who don't make it into heaven, despite saying they professed God's name constantly, right? Like we said, we preach in your name constantly. And you have non-believers who are like, I don't remember serving you. And God's like, when you served the least of these, you served me. And this is his moment of serving the least of these, doing all he can do. He's pinned up on a cross. All he can do is say, hey, knock it off, dude. Stop picking on him. And that's the redemption story. Ultimately, belief in Christ is not believing in this specific entity. And people aren't going to like that, but let me be clear about this. Most people don't know Jesus's first and last name, right? If you were to write a letter to Jesus, the odds of it getting to the correct location are very bad. You would have to do a lot of research, and there's different research on exactly what that man's name was, right? And there's a lot of where exactly he lived, right? Like, which tomb is the tomb, right? Like, you might not know the exacts of Jesus Christ. What you can believe perfectly is in that spirit of Jesus Christ, even if you don't know his name. The Bible was never written, but the Bible was written in a condition, understanding that most people would never read it, right? And you were still expected to believe, because it's not about the Bible. It's not about all this knowledge. It's about doing unto the least of these. Maybe the Bible tells you. Maybe your parents teach you. Maybe this is something you feel, right? Like the Holy Spirit is ultimately the thing that's supposed to guide you here. And that's what causes the belief in Jesus. Not so much as professing to be a Christian, but so much as actually practicing Christianity. And despite his prior events, he practices Christianity when he says to not pick on Jesus anymore. That's how I see that situation. But I'm curious what you think.
Well, I really like the idea of, and I feel like you can easily make this argument that Jesus, the man on earth, was not omniscient. He was a man that had some degree of understanding that he was Jesus and that he was serving God's will, but that he wasn't omniscient and omnipowerful and everything like that. He was, to borrow gaming terms, he was more equivalent to like a cleric channeling God rather than being an actual divinity source. He only became Jesus, the divine entity, after his death. And I perceive things like him questioning God on the cross and saying, "Why have you forsaken me?" as an example of, I'm a human being and I'm in immense suffering, and I don't understand why this is happening to me. Like he understands God's plan in the abstract, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty details, you have doubts as a human being. And last week, we talked all about human doubts. And my perception of that exchange that he has with the criminals on the cross is, again, as a human being, you're reaching out to somebody who's in dire straits, just like you are, and you're offering them a lifeline. You're meeting them on a very human level, not as a superior, but as another human being. I'm going to reach out and do what I can to help you feel better, because I understand your suffering.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I do want to say I do believe that it is true that the man reaches paradise. I don't want to think he's just saying
Yeah,
it to
no,
make him feel better, But yeah.
I feel like Jesus knows that he'll have the ability to do that in the afterlife. And so, therefore he can make good on his promise. He's not just like blindly, like giving him false hope.
I think the last thing that I want to make sure we talk about when it comes to original sin, and if you had anything we didn't get to, I want to make sure you get to talk about it too. But this idea that when children die, do they go to heaven, right? Like, because with the concept of original sin as we would understand it, that they wouldn't, right? Like,
right. The answer should be no.
The answer should be no. Here's the thing about original sin. I don't like calling it original sin because if you have sin, most accurately, it's not that God can't be in the presence of sin. Sin can't be in the presence of God, right? Like God can go wherever he wants and he'll just create desecration among all sin that's in his presence. And so with sin being unable to be in the presence of God, that if you come to God and you're still a sinner, that you're not going to be able to be saved.
The way I was raised, it was basically accepting Jesus as like a invisibility cloak that you throw over yourself to. They never used this specific language, but this is how I envisioned in my head. It's like it's a shield that protects you from God judging you from your sin. That you still have the sin. It's like you're just throwing a cloak over yourself so that God can't see it, or whatever. And that kind of always struck me as pretty juvenile. And also, as you just mentioned, the idea of children or uncontacted tribes that have no concept of Jesus. Like they can't come to Jesus because they don't have any concept of who Jesus is. These tribes that exist out in like Brazil in the Amazon rainforest or whatever. We're specifically scientifically choosing to not contact them, and they don't want to. They seemingly have no desire to be near us either. So how are they going to know Jesus? Well, the way I was always told, they're going to inherently come to Christ as a result of the fact that they weren't given the choice. If you never had the opportunity to choose whether to come to God or not, you're going to be saved. Which always struck me as like, well, if you also believe in original sin and you believe in that, those are contradictory ideas. But correct. I never, as a child, like a child and a young teen and everything like that in the church, I never connected the fact that they were contradictory ideas. So I never had that bit of existential crisis of like, well, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's when we're guided by the Spirit, I think the Spirit can lead us to a lot of different truths, right? And there's a lot of I don't think different truths in the sense different from each other, just truths that we might not have in the Bible. Jesus himself teaches, there's so much more I have to teach you, and I'm going to have to give you the Holy Spirit because there's no way I could, like, it can all be written down here. And I do think that some of this is in the Bible. I think maybe the best example of this is in 2 Samuel when David, his child dies. And David says, I want my baby to return to me, but that's not going to happen. The only thing that's going to happen is someday I'm going to return to him. Presuming that David goes to heaven, then David is assuming that his child then also went to heaven. So there is at least an understanding within the Bible that these children who die go to heaven. This is a modern controversy because of, as you talked about, Aaron, these thoughts that came about after the church, the way we created this idea of original sin. While it exists in the Bible a little bit, the idea that that you're going to hell no matter what until some kind of divine intervention or whatever is not, it's not a struggle they had within the Bible. We created something to help us understand that biblical doctrine. But by creating that, we created a complication that they did not have within the Bible. So this is a new complication that we have because of the way we've kind of invented the idea of original sin. Now, I say invented, again, I understand the verses are there in the Bible. You should read them, we should accept them, we should discuss them, talk about them, debate them, whatever. I actually don't mind the verses that are in there about the Bible that talk about this. But I think when we formulate, when we formulate this idea that these people are destined for hell or whatever, something like that, something that's not in the Bible, that's a flaw in our understanding of original sin and what we've decided to set up about it. It's really not helpful. And the other thing is I want to extend this way beyond children or children with special needs or people who die alone in Africa or something like that. Because Jesus says that all people have to come unto him like children. Otherwise, you're not getting into heaven at all. Right? That there is this idea that even the adults need to make a return to this childlike faith, to this, and not childlike in the sense that it's stupid, but you look at how they're coming to Jesus. They just want to be with him because it's fun, right? As far as we can tell in that passage, it's exciting and fun, right? This is the way that you are supposed to be with God. Something that I need to impress upon Christians much more than I even currently do now. Because so often we try to guilt you there. We try to shame you there. We try to fear you there. We try to educate you there. We try to discipline you there. But why did these kids want to be with Jesus in that passage? It's not because of doctrine. It's not because of sin. It's not because of forgiveness. In their case, it's not even because of healing. They just want to be with him because it's exciting and fun. And ultimately, that's kind of the faith that you need to develop in order to really get that Christianity on. Is this exciting and fun relationship with God again. And the idea that there's this original sin that's keeping you from that, keeping you from doing that. Yes, it can. Certainly, if you decide to give in to these evil inclinations that we all have, sure. But man, you can fix those at a pretty young age. And even if you die, we're all going to die having a few of those inclinations, right? We're told of a sinless person in the Bible, a person, I shouldn't say sinless, a person who God had conquered or who had conquered sin in the Bible. There's two of them, and God took both of them back into heaven because then the point for you on this earth is done. So just by virtue of us dying here on earth means we died with a problem. We died with that sin. Right? We died with some issue in our hearts. That doesn't keep us away from paradise, like with the criminal on the cross, right? This doesn't keep us away. It's okay to just be like, man, I messed up a lot. Who's the one that God takes mercy on? When there's the prayers where he says, the ones like, oh, you've given me so much and I have so much to give. And then there's the it's not a tax collector. It's the plebeian, the publican. He's like, God, I'm sinning. My job is a sin. My life is a sin. Have mercy on me. And Jesus says, that's the guy who I have mercy on. That's the guy. Not the guy who's living perfectly over here. The guy who recognizes imperfections, just being like, man, I need a lot of mercy right now. I make a lot of mistakes. I'm still making a lot of mistakes. this recognition. So the conquering of that, what we would recognize of that original sin, isn't ever something that happens in this life. It's not really intended to. You're intended to have this kind of struggle, this nature of the fall of man, this thing that causes us to die, right? If we recognize that the wages of sin are death, well, we all still die because we will all still keep sinning in this earth, right? Like it's going to keep happening. But that's not the point, right? The point is that we teach this fall. We should be teaching about this fall and this problematic nature of that fall. And but it's not supposed to create a heartlessness. In fact, I find the concept of original sin should create a great deal of heart within us. To say that we're all in this together. We're all flawed. We're all making mistakes. Nobody's above it. And you know what? We can all get better. Like we're all in this, we're all working on this journey. None of us are getting to the top of this mountain in this lifetime, but we're all working on it together. The purpose of this earth is not to be perfect. It is so deeply imperfect, but it is supposed to be perfecting, supposed to make us see and witness all these evil things. And then to say like, I want to rise above that. I want to be better than all that. I want to do something that conquers all of that. And that journey, that fight, that struggle is what makes this life the reason. I don't want to say worth living, but it's the reason for this life. Yeah. And I think it's a rather beautiful concept. Aaron, any other thoughts you have about original sin before we talk about the news?
We covered everything I wanted to talk about.
Sweet. Well, let's talk about news and stuff here. I think first thing here I wanted to talk about, obviously the big one on the day is the healthcare, UnitedHealthcare assassination from Luigi Mangione. And of course, he has to have a super Italian name, right? Taking out Brian Thompson. And there is a lot of thoughts about this. I have a lot of deep thoughts about this because a lot of these touch things that touch me personally, things that have happened in my life and things that I deal with on a daily basis. To break it down a little bit, I made a post about it, but I'm going to read a little bit from this here. The shooter apparently had back pain, and my gal has scoliosis. Her spine actually goes directly under her right shoulder blade. And I mean, if I were to give her a back massage, there's no, like, it's directly under the shoulder blade. It's a huge deviation of the spine. It's created lifelong back pain with her. And I don't think people understand how debilitating it is. I shared this and it was shared by a couple other people who were also dealing, one of them, their loved ones dealing with back pain. Another one, they're dealing with an L5 issue. And they said, this person was like, I've given birth to children and even childbirth doesn't compare to this level of pain. When there's an issue with medication, it's zero sleep, it's writhing pain, screams of agony. Jamie has seizures. I don't know the level of Mangione's pain, but I do want to say, well, people look at him and he looks amazing. First of all, he's like six-pack abs, right? Like he looks like he's in good shape. But look at all the athletes that get back pain and get addicted to these opioids and end up having a lot of problems. And actually, Jamie brought this up, and I think it's a really amazing point, that I think people who are perfectly healthy and then develop back pain and feel that debilitation end up taking more drastic measures than somebody who's been in back pain for their whole life. This is just how they think the world works. When you're capable and able to do everything, and you have that taken away from you, is a real... It's really tough to see where you, like, what level of participation you go from being excited to be at every party to being hoping that the world won't wake you up today and that you can lay down. Sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
That sudden loss of ability is, I mean, being blind your entire life, you don't have any concept of what you've lost. You know, like you can imagine what it would be like to have sight. But being a sports car driver, you know, a race car driver, and then suddenly losing your vision at 32, you've lost your entire life at that point. Your livelihood. You have to suddenly build a new identity for yourself from the ground up at 32. I mean, I would so much rather be disabled from birth than to lose a limb or something like that now. Because you don't have the concept of what it would be like to not have that ability.
Yeah. Insurance denial. So I lost my insurance from Obamacare. I actually was on an insurance that was for healthy people, right? And I was athletic, I was healthy, I had a blood test done, I had somebody come to the house and assess my health level. And so I lost that when Obamacare went through. With how I'm doing now, even the cheapest catastrophic insurance that I can afford is a mortgage. And then if I don't pay that, there's a fine, right? Like I get fined if I don't decide to pay that. You're giving up your literal livelihood for health insurance in this country. And then that insurance gives you the runaround when you try to use it, right? Like I have to use it. Like I'm forced to buy into this system. And I am giving up so many good things. Think of what you could have if you didn't have to pay for health insurance, right? Like now this is going to vary person to person, right? But does it? Because in truth, even if you get yours free, you sign up on the website and they were like, hey, you're in a situation, you don't make dirt money, like you get it for free. Think of what it costs you in terms of the country paying for it, all these other things that you could have, all this other prosperity that you could have that we don't have. And that's at best. Most people are paying for it hundreds of dollars a month. These are hundreds of dollars that could be spent on groceries, on health, on vacations, on anything, right? Like just something else, on an upgraded mortgage, on a mortgage at all, right? In my case, like I could have a second house, right? And when they give you the runaround and then deny your claim, saying you got to pay the entire thing out of pocket. Listen, the whole reason the prices are where they are is because of this mandated like insurance system. Like you have, like we're forced to pay for it. And then to deny you instead of that is not right. It should be mentioned that this Brian Thompson, and I'm gonna try to talk about this as, and I'm a pretty middle ground person on this issue. So actually, I'm not even trying to talk about it from a middle ground perspective. Thompson was the literal worst person in the country about this, as far as denying claims. I won't say poster child for it because like he didn't necessarily like put his face out there a lot, but he's got a video of him talking about it and how like, and he's certainly part of the tactic of the delay, deny, and defend, right? You delay your decision as long as possible. You deny the coverage and then you defend this decision, no matter like, even if it's reasonable or whatever. Listen, if you're mandating, so let's think about this in terms of like gay marriage. I don't want the government in marriage at all, but if you're going to recognize marriage, you have to recognize all marriages. You don't get the opportunity to discriminate. So if the government is going to intervene and say, no, you have to be part of this health insurance system, like we have to do this, then you have to cover it all. Yeah. You just have to, right? Like it's like saying, well, I want the government involved in marriage, but only some kinds of marriages. That's ridiculous, right? Like that's them enforcing a morality. And so denying insurance is incredibly unethical, especially while you're sitting on billions of dollars. Like, I mean, this is, you could say he's part of a system, and it's true. This is a systemic problem. But Brian Thompson was a particularly notable
exceptional
part of
it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would I say he's certainly not the core part of the issue, but he was a participant, right? Like, and this is a really bad. I can understand why you would feel rage. And in case of Luigi Mangione, from what I understand, he not only was going through his own back pain, but was helping a loved one who was also trying to get a claim accepted. And I understand the family that Mangione comes from is somewhat wealthy, he's well-educated, like all that was there. But the insult of it, of just being like, no, like, I think that almost makes it worse because like I said, if you are wealthy, well, then he's paying thousands of dollars a month, right? Like for this insurance that is not being accepted. And then they're also, in addition to saying, oh, thank you very much for those thousands of dollars a month that you're forced to pay. Now here's the full bill for this procedure, which is inflated because I'm assuming that that insurance is covering this. Like wildly unethical. I'm sure, Aaron, you have a lot of thoughts about insurance denial.
I do. But I'm not sure how much I can say that you haven't already said. You've set the groundwork extraordinarily well. A lot of the details that I would have brought up, you've already covered. I almost want to talk about this from the perspective of Luigi as an individual not being identified. Because I think 3 days ago or so, I think it was 3 days ago, we didn't have any idea who the individual was.
Right.
And we were talking about it more as a nebulous issue of John Q. Everyman versus the CEO, rather than Luigi the individual versus the CEO. Right. And I think that's a better framework because Luigi as an individual is a complicated person from everything that I've read about them. Yeah. They have political perspectives that range all over the spectrum, like in a very confusing manner. Adulation towards Kaczynski. You have the back pain issue. You have the fact that he was a fairly wealthy, like he came from a very wealthy family. The fact that he was 26, which is particularly notable because that's when you get kicked off your parents' health insurance. The fact that he had some really unfortunate social positions, social views. He was kind of part of the manosphere and kind of part of the I forget all that I've read, but it was some pretty bad social positions, various bigotries and things like that, which, it's unfortunately common in our society. I don't like to focus on Luigi the person. I'd rather view this as a generic person living in American society. That's the framework I'd like to come at it from.
Yeah. Well, and I get why, because we all have problems, right? I was at 26, I was in the manosphere, right? Like, I mean, so part of me, like, I relate to that, you know what I mean? At one point, I probably would have been seducible by Kaczynski, right? Like, they're kind of trying to figure out where there was like left wing or right wing, where his reality was just probably a little bit odd, but that's the thing, is like, you poke at this and then it's easy to tear down a person because we're all sinners. We just went over this, right? We're all sinners, and so if it's like remember when that cop shot somebody who was in his own home because she thought it was her home because she was drunk.
Yes.
And then they were like, but he did have weed on him, just so you know. It's like, well, yeah, you're going to find something imperfect in everybody, right? Like, this is... You
gotta poison that well, so it's not as cut and dry how incredibly awful this was.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's there's a lot of poisoning the well we could do. I do think it's important to note that this is what kind of drives people there. In fact, I would even look at him being in the manosphere in these unfortunate social positions as part of the desperation of being in something like this, that you're desperate for somebody to understand you, I know that's what brought me to the manosphere. Like, people didn't understand me, understand what issues I was going through. And I felt like if I talked about them in public, I was just beat down. So you go, well, these people seem to understand, like, here's a bunch of people who understand what it's like to be like, yeah, did you lose your livelihood? That's crippling, as opposed to just being like, suck it up and be better, whatever. And so I find him, I guess I'm not trying to poison the well when I talk about him. It's just, there's a lot of...
No. I definitely wasn't making that. I was just talking generally. Not necessarily specifically about this conversation.
Yeah. When we talk about pain management expenses, like, so as Aaron, we've talked about before, but under the pharmaceuticals have always been nuts, right? Like, and mostly exist in monopolies as is. The Inflation Reduction Act gave pharmaceutical companies like unlimited monopolistic power. And if you search the document for the word monopole, don't leave off the end, because it doesn't, they're not like, they use different forms of the word monopoly, monopolize,
Right.
But you just go through it and just look at the limitless power they get. It's so vague. It's like any ingestible, right? Like any biological that the FDA rules might even be able to affect your health, right? Like, and you're just like, well, doesn't food affect our health? Like, theoretically, food could be covered by a lot of this, and they received like virtually unlimited power to increase this. So a lot of people who are on pain management within the last 3 years saw their prices skyrocket. So pain management was expensive beforehand. Now it's almost disastrous, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, it's everybody's suffering from inflation. So I think when people complain about the price of their meds, you usually just go like, yeah, inflation, I understand. They're way beyond inflation. Like what we're talking about with medicine and pain management has been way outpacing inflation. And it's really, I relate to that, to seeing like, look, it goes from annoying if you're paying $100 a month for pain management. When that goes from $100 to $400 a month in the course of 2 years, I mean, what's the next step? Does it go $400 to $1,200 in another 2 years? Like, people are just, this is the least of us. And these are people, this is society and government picking on these people, right? This is bureaucracies and corporations picking on these people.
And what's particularly notable is the fact that this is an inelastic good. This is something that you can't not have. You can't stop managing your pain. Otherwise, you become so crippled that you die from other means. I mean, it's like not taking your HIV medication. It's like it's not an optional thing that you could just go without. If I'm going to miss my rent payment or my my polio vaccine, or I don't know, whatever, like
it's not luxurious. This isn't like getting a thicker coat for winter, where a thin coat, he'll at least live. This is like for my gal, it's death, right?
Yeah.
And the issue is that, like, I mean, we've survived a couple of nights for like, if she's withdrawing and she's not on it, and the combination of the withdrawals and the bed, I mean, even after, so she's actually gotten clean before. And actually she switched over to a different kind of medication, one that was a little bit safer recently. She had to withdraw first. So I understand what the difference between like the withdrawal symptoms and the pain management symptoms, the pain. And I mean, the pain, it's not just like, oh, that hurts. It's like, it will kill you. Like seizures and like nonstop seizures. She had 3 in one day. Like, well, and all this happens because I could go off on this again forever. I've been through this so many times, but just like the doctor forgot to call the place, right? Like to approve the prescription, right?
Yep.
Or if you're going to go on vacation on the 21st, but that's the day that your prescription is up, you can't go on vacation that day, right? Like, or if you just try to like switch the location it is because you're going to be out of town. No, you can't do that. And so we'll have something where it's just like, the doctor just, like, the office just didn't get the fax over. And they're like, well, we'll do it tomorrow. Yeah. It's like, okay, but that's a night of seizures for us, right? Like, I am just, and we depend on that. We depend on that. I have no control over this, right? Like, we are completely in their hands. And as the expense goes up, we look more at these things that, like, you said it, Aaron.
Well, and the fact that it's invisible, like it's invisible to you, like to the outside world, that y'all are having to go through this, which makes it feel so alienating. Like, unless you're actively telling people about your experiences, they're just going to assume that you and Jamie are both fine by default, and that you're just being whiny. Like my mother, I'm fortunate that my extended family has been almost exclusively blessed enough to not have to deal with these major medical issues and things like that. I haven't had a close family member pass away. Most of my family's pretty healthy. My mother, the best thing that I have to analogize to, has arthritis in her hands, and she has to receive injections in her hands to be able to function, to have the gripping strength to be able to lift and turn things, and that sort of thing with her hands. But when we just recently went on vacation, and because of an exact situation that you're talking about, like where the doctor drops the ball or whatever, she goes in to receive her regular treatment before vacation, and she's told, oh, that doctor's not in today. We have this doctor, and oh, they aren't able to perform your injection. You'll have to wait until next week. And she's like, well, I'm due for my injection. And if I don't get it, it's going to be excruciating pain. And they're like, well, sorry, good luck to you. And so, yeah, we went on vacation, and my mother spent the entire vacation agonizing. I mean, every 2 or 3 minutes, she would gasp from the pain in her hands the whole time and it made it miserable for all of us, because like, how are we supposed to have a good time when my mom's suffering, and she's lucky, like she's, it's just her hands, it's not like a back pain or something like that.
Just her hands.
Yeah.
I mean, how monstrous can you be? I just, yeah. I have another family member who is on, and I don't identify who, because, it's personal, but they're not actually psychotic, but they're on antipsychotic medication. It's for a mental issue, right? Like, and so it's a particular brand of antipsychotic medication that helps them, just deal with the world, right?
Yeah.
The doctor hadn't seen this person in 3 months. We didn't know they wanted to see us. Like, we were just getting the renewals. We were like, we'll do the yearly checkups or whatever, but they're like, no, we need to see you once every 3 months. We didn't know that. We find out by showing up and not getting it the day it's supposed to be filled. In case you've ever had to fill a prescription, they don't give you that with a lot of time to spare. They give it the day you run out, So it's not like, in case you wonder why people are having meltdowns at the pharmacy, this is why, right? Like, it's not like there's a lot of there's overlap time to be like, oh, you made a mistake. That's okay. I'll just come back tomorrow. Get this, like, the doctor is like, oh, okay, out of town, but we'll be back in 2 weeks, right? And makes a note, like, just be like, come see me. We'll get you, like, I've already scheduled you 2 weeks. It's like, so you want 2 weeks of them to have like a psychotic episode? Like, if they were actually psychotic, like I said, they're not,
right?
But they're still going to deal with this like mental issue. Like, you're saying you need to be experiencing whatever it may be, it psychosis. I mean, for some people, this is like serial killer dreams and acid trips and like tripping through the air and non-functional.
And you're going to be, you're going to be criminally liable for anything that happens as a result of that time. Like you as an individual who would otherwise be on your medication and be responsible and keep it under check, and you wouldn't be I mean, I know that most mentally ill people are not a danger to society. I know that, but speaking as the idea of somebody who would be a danger to society if they weren't on their medication, and they know that, and they're trying to be responsible, and then you get put into the situation where you have no control over the situation, and then you also could be potentially criminally liable for your actions that you didn't want to be in the situation for in the first place.
Occasionally a video will go viral. Most of the time it's somebody in the military, but just when they do get like denied their PTSD medication or something. And it's like snot bubbles, tears in a car, like punching the steering wheel. And it's like, I just want to feel normal, right? Like, these are the people you're picking on. These are the people we're picking on to make our money on. It is not right. What's happening, the state of healthcare is abysmal. And I don't want to just say this country. I think the two countries that we point to as like countries that do it better are like Britain and Canada. And they have so many problems. And then, I mean, there are some that are like Cuba that are like worse in like most ways, but you can find like a way that they're better. But like Britain, which is just like, oh, you got warts? Well, you're not allowed to get that treated anywhere else. And we're going to lock you down here to make sure you don't get it treated anywhere else. But you're also not allowed to treat it here. I don't care that the warts are literally taking over your whole body and eating away your arm, right? Like, and then you got Canada, which is just like, might we recommend death?
Dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and these are the two that do it the best in the world, right? And you're just like, oh my gosh. Like, this is not just an American problem. There are certain aspects that America does well and does badly. I think one of the interesting things about traveling overseas is like, you'll go to Britain and you'll see like their EpiPens are like the price of deodorant. and it's just on the wall. Like I can just pick one up and get it, right? Versus here where it's like $250 or something like that for one dose. Like and I need a prescription and it's behind a counter and everything like that. Like just the different ways. And
America's fantastic for healthcare tourism. Like if you want a medical procedure done and you're finding it difficult to navigate through your socialized healthcare system, you just fly over to America and get it done. Yep. Whereas America's system is fantastic if you're wealthy enough to afford it. I mean, it's the best healthcare system in the world if you can afford it.
Yeah, there is so like rich people, like the top 1% get the majority of their dental procedures done in Mexico because it's just cheaper to make the trip. They have the expendable time, right? Sure. So they can just and like the thing is, it's like that's like it should be embarrassing that Mexico does this better, but really they don't actually do it better. They just have less things in the way of between you and a quality dental procedure, right? Like it's not like all their doctors are just magically better. What I'm trying to convey is we're artificially doing this to ourselves. This is not the price of better care. This is not the price of like, cutting edge technology that we're paying. Like we are paying for artificial limitations. And this is against when the Bible talks about how you treat the least of us, this is it, right? This is it. There's no more it issue. These are the least of us. These are people in pain, experiencing severe medical or mental issues. And we are telling them, no, you're not even allowed to pay market value. You have to pay. I mean, the fact that the trade-off for this was capping insulin at 250% of market value. So we're still ripping off the people who get insulin, right? Like we're still telling them, sorry, you're going to pay 2.5 times what you should pay, right?
Only because if we didn't cap it, they would bill you even more.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. And that's the right. And all this, listen, markets are great because if we allowed people to produce stuff, I mean, what, Mark Cuban, right? Like was allowed to make like 6 other medications and like immediately undercut the medications he was about to make, like he was competing with by I mean, you're paying like $1 when the medication costs you like $150, right? Like, I mean, it's like the medications that he was permitted to undercut just by worming in on those. He was 10% of the original costs here. And this is one person being allowed to compete.
This is right? This is tangential, but I just heard a story the other day about how Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, he's a billionaire. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know he was a billionaire. Right. And so it was a story about how he made his wealth. Mm-hmm. He made his wealth by purchasing, he had the money to purchase a medical pharmaceutical company who had never produced a single medication before. They had patents for medication, but they didn't actually produce anything. And he bought the company. He hyped it up and got a whole bunch of investment seed capital and then pumped and dumped the company and made all that money and became a billionaire despite having not achieved anything. And it was through the pharmaceutical company. And you're thinking to yourself, like, what is the repercussion? There's this fantasy notion of, okay, so the initial idea is, if I want to make a buck, I have to steal a buck from you. And then we come in with the notion of, no, the pie grows bigger as the economy grows bigger and nobody has to lose some. It's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
And then that's like the intermediary step. And then it's like that meme of the low IQ person, the middle IQ person, and the high IQ person. And you end up going back to the low IQ position as the high IQ person. And the reality, you know what I'm talking about.
I do know the meme,
yeah. The reality is, it isn't a zero-sum game. But for somebody to do something like Vivek Ramaswamy did, to become a billionaire, somebody else had to lose. Somebody else had to lose big time. And Vivek Ramaswamy is not an anomaly. A lot of people make their money by pumping and dumping companies.
Sure.
And when you pump and dump a company, what happened? Where did all that wealth come from? Well, it came from regular people who are like one of the biggest. The news story that I was listening to about Vivek, one of the biggest contributors to the company that he pumped and dumped was a fireman's pension fund. Well, those firemen are just SOL now. Like they're screwed. And you talk about the economy not being a zero-sum game, but those firemen are going to feel like it is.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to retire, or they're not going to be able to retire with as much comfort as they were expecting as a result of the losses.
Right. It's artificially making it a zero-sum game. That's like these people pay to subsidize these people. I mean, this is subsidizing the rich as much as you can. And rich who, as you mentioned, aren't necessarily producing anything. They're sitting on a patent, and they're making producers who are problematic enough, but they're making the producers pay the patent just so that they can say, I have the patent, I technically own it. And it's not like they even designed it. They hired a bunch of scientists, right? And it's like, well, don't they deserve money for having the scientists do it? Sure, but not what they're making, right?
And we valorize these people as taking the risks.
Right.
Like we should honor them because they've taken the risk. And I'm like, well, what risks did they take?
Right. I mean, there are people that are trying to develop this. I think the sad part with a lot of these patents is there are other people that come to these conclusions, but it's like, oh, but patented. Sorry, like, you're not allowed to, you don't get any credit for it. I'm like, this isn't a college thesis. If two people come to the same conclusion, then it's okay, right? Like the knowledge is out there and it's by good. Well, what's the reward? Well, the reward is healing people. So like, and let's be honest, people are going to willing to pay for this. There's this drug here called Firdapse. I encourage people to look this up on Wikipedia. It'll auto direct you to something called like amifampridine, but just search for Firdapse. It's the easiest way to find it. It is a drug that when three companies were allowed to produce it, they all produced it for free with the advertising for their other, for themselves on the outside of the containers, because that paid the bills, right? And other people were like, hey, this is a really great drug. It is the only drug that is FDA approved, right? And it's a prescription that is able to treat a specific condition, Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome, right? And there's few 100,000 people that are on it. This is the only way they live, right? They have to have this or they're dead. And without it, so they're dead without it. They need it. There are 3 companies allowed to make it. They're all producing it for free. One company buys out enough Congress people that they get the right to have a monopoly on it, right? One of the producers. And the product goes from free to like $15,000 for like a dose, right? Like 1 month worth of dose, right? We know what the product actually costs. The thing is even when they were making it for free, we can say, well, no, but nothing's really free. That's true. They put an advertisement on the outside. They received enough money back to pay for the scientists who developed these and enough for themselves to keep with that advertising, right? It's like navigating. It's like the internet is free. Sure. Right. But like it pays for itself with the advertising, right? Like it's out there. These people are getting their money, right? They just want more. And then this guy buys them out. Bernie Sanders, I actually know of this because he's the one who called it out. Like in Congress, like what the heck happened here? Right. And we just basically the FDA just gave one company permission, allowed them to monopolize it. And it went from like free to like, I think 15,000 might even be lowballing it, but basically like all your income to live. Right. And that's what you have to do. And yeah, it's a type of muscular dystrophy. It's so like people with muscular dystrophy, again, this is the least of us, right? Like these are the people. And we are bleeding them. And it's not enough to bleed them for $100, even though that would make that plus the advertising would be a infinity times percent, whatever, like what they need. Because like I said, they were making the product, they were still making it when they had the competition, it was free. They eliminated the competition, and that's when it spiked through the roof. It's unconscionable, and the system has to change, and people don't feel heard. And I'm unfortunately, I'm aware that we've kind of run almost out of time here, like out of time.
Well, I mean, but it's really up to when we want to stop.
Right, whenever we feel like stopping. But yeah, I do think we should at least finish this story.
We've laid the groundwork heavily at this point for the healthcare system being a disaster.
Yes.
And we've talked a little bit about Brian Thompson, the individual, and the fact that he was a particularly notable individual for the system being the way that it is. I mean, obviously, no one single individual is responsible for the system being the way it is. That's the reason why it's a systemic issue instead of an interpersonal one. Yeah. But if you were going to pick one single person for the system being the way it is, he's in the top 100. You know, like he's part of the system as much as anybody else with his that much status and power. And so then we come to the decision of like, well, is that action justified?
So the situation I have with justification of killing somebody, yes, I would say it is justified. I think eye for an eye is justified. I think that is a perfectly justifiable legal explanation. Somebody breaks your arm, you break their arm. Somebody hurts you, you hurt them. In addition to just saying like eye for an eye, because I know that that's going to immediately take the Christians out of it because we're told not to operate that way, is that you add in that the other factors, the desperation, and you add into the fact that they're not really listening, right? Like we are actually having this conversation now in America. What was going to make somebody listen besides something like this? And people can't really fathom a peaceful display that would make people talk about this, right? Like it's hard to fathom a situation where they wouldn't just ignore you. Whereas if you kill somebody, and as the story I have opened here says, like now we're threatening other CEOs and, leaders of, and actually the McDonald's workers themselves are having threats of violence against them. Because they're the ones who snitched or whatever and, saw the guy and had the police come in and arrest him. And all these CEOs that were also threatening with violence, like we just don't. And now we're actually having this conversation, whereas you and I probably wouldn't even be talking about this, despite it impacting our lives and our loved ones and everything like this.
Imagine 10,000 people who have family members or themselves personally impacted by back pain doing a demonstration in wherever, UHC's corporate headquarters are or something like that.
Right.
It might be a local news story, maybe. Whereas you murder their CEO and suddenly it is a national news story for weeks on end.
Yeah. So this brings us to the Christian perspective. Like, how do we justify this? How do we rationalize this? How do we talk about this? What is to be done? Well, I think most importantly, we try to change the healthcare system, right? Like we make it into something good. You didn't kill anybody. You can think of what you want about people being killed, but you know what? The conversation is open and we should be talking about it. It's really important for us to be talking about it right now because the iron is very hot right now. We should be highlighting all these times that things are bad. Over half of Republicans and Democrats say they have no guilt or no poor feeling over this man's murder, right? Like over half the country is glad this guy is dead or at least has no feeling about this guy being dead. Like, I think it was both approved of as well as don't really collateral damage, don't really see it as important. And so it's going across the aisle. So there is something that's brewing up here. I always want to be careful. I myself am a pacifist, so obviously I don't support this. But I also am a pacifist because of pragmatism and not because of just some airheaded, we do no violence because no violence. I do believe that there's something to peacemaking that can get positive attention put on ourselves, that can put positive pressure on us. But I understand the desperation of the people that commit acts like this, and that are in these situations. And I do understand why something that's this sensational at least like makes the news. And it's certainly the easiest way to make the news. You just kill a guy and boom, it's in the news. It's national headlines, right? Like this is as simple as it gets as far as making a national discussion about it.
Yeah, Brian Thompson's victims will never,
correct.
They never got in the spotlight. They're just a statistic. Oh yeah, my aunt died last week because she couldn't afford, so-and-so treatment. And that's just incidental background noise.
Right. If defensive violence is ever warranted, it's warranted against Brian Thompson.
Yeah.
So and here's the thing, like, I want you to think about this, because if defensive violence is warranted, think about how long your murder list is in the United States. Every president we've had, every prospective president we've had, every politician probably right now has, if we count their deaths due to like their cold policy, like everybody in Congress, right? We just start killing, we have to ask ourselves where this ends. And if this is the message we want to send, and if it's going to work. I've come around a little on my pacifism. I'm reading a book about the Weather Underground with Aaron right now. Now, they did a good job to make sure nobody outside of their group died. So while they did commit violence against like properties and buildings and such, they actually worked to make sure that they didn't kill an innocent person. So that's commendable. Obviously a little bit different than the situation we're dealing with here. But it does talk about it is dealing with the efficacy of violence and how much that matters. Now, I will say I'm opening my heart to this book, and to not just the book, but to violence as a concept in general. Jesus said he didn't come to bring peace but a sword. Obviously, you don't make peace when there's Caesars in the world, right? Jesus is not there to make Caesar's life more comfy. Jesus is there to bring discomfort. Difference is how we're bringing that discomfort. Is it because we're bringing healing to his people, or because we're like shooting people? Now, here's the thing, like, what are the quality of the people we're shooting? What are these people doing? Is this warranted? Is this defensive? Like, it's as defensive as catching a robber in your house and shooting them. That being said, I think there's a point to be made for Christians not wanting to shoot a robber that breaks into their home. To say that, like, where does this end? Where does this end? We have seen this attempted before in a successful revolution. I want to say Psychology Today has a great breakdown on violent versus nonviolent revolutions. Nonviolent revolutions are overwhelmingly more successful. However, there are instances when violent revolutions succeeded. For example, the one that happened just before the events of Les Miserables, right, was a successful revolution. They killed all the people they wanted dead. They installed the government they wanted installed. They backed it, like, complete success through violence. What happens 20 years later? Same old government, same old, Gavroche, right? We tried to change the world too fast. Now we got another king and he's no better than the last. Is this the cycle that we're going to get on if we embrace this type of thing? We don't want to, but we don't want a lot of these things. Like, what I will tell you is this. I would use the Holy Spirit and let them guide you. The Holy Spirit will sometimes tell you to do things that are not in line with the Bible. So while the Bible might teach pacifism, for those who aren't quite sold on that, I would strongly recommend reading The Kingdom of God is Within You by Leo Tolstoy. Fantastic read. Short, if you're scared of Tolstoy. I know that can be the fear. This is thankfully, mercifully, a short little book here. But the Bible is pretty pacifist. However, the Spirit may tell you to do non-pacifist things that are correct nonetheless. Jesus at the temple square, or even Abraham sacrificing his son, right? Like, I'm not a party to that, of what happened, right? If somebody were to be like, should I sacrifice my son? I would tell you no, right? But the Holy Spirit sometimes wants to teach you a different lesson than the one that I necessarily think is biblically sound. The Holy Spirit does teach things that are counter to what's in the Bible sometimes. And we judge if that's the Spirit by telling of what the fruits of those labor are. So I'm going to take a step back from this situation. Ordinarily, I would just condemn the murder outright. But I'm going to take a step back and just say, like, you know what? What are the fruits going to be of this situation? At the moment, I've got some good, some bad. Some rates are rising because people are hiring small armies to defend themselves now. However, some claims that were denied are also being approved, right? Some McDonald's employees are being threatened with violence, and one actually had to close down for a bit or whatever. That's bad. But we're having a discussion about the problems with healthcare in this country. I don't know, right? And I'm willing to kind of just say, you know what, I'm going to see what happens. It's not for me, and it shouldn't be for most people. I think there's a reason why it's like, thou shalt not kill unless I tell you to kill. Don't kill unless God gives you that command. I would say, but wait for God to give you that command to put it on your heart. I wouldn't necessarily encourage it. I definitely don't come off as ghoulish and celebratory, neither to Brian Thompson and his family, nor to, especially as you mentioned, Aaron, the people that we don't want to be afterthoughts in this, the victims of Brian Thompson, the victims of UnitedHealthcare. Like, I don't want to be callous to any of them when I talk about that. And this is why I spend so long talking about this and having all these feelings, because I don't want to cut anybody's feelings short, right? Like, there's so much to talk about here. You were saying something. Go ahead.
Yeah, the new CEO that's taken over for Brian Thompson has already released a public statement. And in the public statement, it includes the line, "We will continue to guard against unnecessary care," which to me is, we will not in any way reflect upon what led people to this point. Not just the murderer themselves, but also the fact that so many people condone it. We're not going to reflect on any of that. We're going to completely double down. And we know intellectually, like, if you just take an objective look at the way that they were handling their denial process, and the fact that so many of these claims got auto-denied by bots and things like that, and the system was set up deliberately to try to obfuscate people's claims and to make them jump through hoops. It's designed to wear you down so you just acquiesce, and if you can afford it, you just ignore it, because it's too much trouble to continue to follow up with your claim and everything like that. So you make people take a full-time, like a part-time job out just to try to repeatedly follow up on their claims so that they can try to get the money that they were owed in the first place from the service that they're paying for. And he releases the statement, "We will continue to guard against unnecessary care." It's essentially saying, we are going to continue the path that we were already down. And if anything, if we're going to make any change at all, it's to make it even worse. And that's as a meme says, that's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works out for them. Like, it's wild.
Right. I mean, she's certainly making the rounds on the hit list. I've seen her face. I've seen her address. I've seen her schedule, right? Like, people want her dead. So let's see what, like you said, let's see if it works out. Like, if they are gonna, if she gets killed, we'll see. I mean, I do not want that to happen. I want everybody to have a change of heart and to come around. But does God sometimes put a Pharaoh in your life for the sake of showing his glory and his wrath? Yes, that is also true, right? Like, so I understand that, like, I want there to be a nice, peaceful demonstration. I think it's hard to go over this in just like a single, like, sit down session. I would at some point think it would be important to talk about peaceful revolution and some of the ways that could work. I don't know about in a Christian perspective, although there are Christian ways in the Bible. But just like from a perspective, because I think at the moment we are so hurt that the idea that peaceful revolution would work seems so foreign to us. We have to understand that the peaceful revolution is a really good track record if we understand how to use it, right? Like, and it's not just non-violent revolution, specifically peaceful revolution, like tactful. There are things that you do that can highlight these issues that can also make your oppressors lose the will to fight and to stop harming you. It's happened historically in the world, and I do think it's something that we should explore again. It's a tough one because, like I said, my heart goes out to these people. One of the things I specifically mentioned in my other post was just the desperation you feel. I've done illegal things to alleviate Jamie's pain, right? Like, I haven't killed anybody.
Yeah.
But do I understand why somebody would? If it's like they look at their healthcare, like if they look at their family member writhing on the floor, agonizing pain, experiencing seizures, dead any second, this is their quality of life now. Or even if they're successfully treating it, just paying thousands and thousands of dollars, going broke, like losing their money trying to treat this, like losing their sanity trying to treat this, just trying to make sure that the doctors and the pharmacists and everything's all set up and organized. Sometimes the pharmacy just doesn't even have it, right? Like, and then you've just got to go somewhere else, but they don't send that just anywhere else. You have to have your doctor send it somewhere else. Oh, what happens if it's the weekend? Well, I guess you're without it for 3 days, aren't you? Yeah. Right? Like, it's just,
I'll back you up. I've committed a felony to help people not have to deal with pain.
Yeah, committed a couple. Sarah Breda Wagner, she's actually a felon for it, like helping somebody deal with their pain. Like, I am so like, and it's break the laws, guys. There, I'll tell you, like, break the law to do the right thing. Let the Holy Spirit guide you as far as what the right thing is. I know we're kind of out of time, but Aaron, there's a few here that I wanted to go over just to show you here, just for fun.
While you're looking for your next thing, I just wanted to say, I just dropped a YouTube link. If people are interested in hearing another analysis of the situation that takes a good middle ground between this was justified and violence is never the answer. There's a good meditation on that. And her name is Rebecca Watson on YouTube. She goes with the name Skepchick as her moniker. And the video is violence the answer? And she goes over the studies that Hody was referring to earlier in regards to nonviolent protests being the overwhelming positive impetus for change, and analyzes whether or not those the studies were properly methodologically done, and it's a good neutral analysis of the situation, and I found a lot of value in it. It's not terribly long, and I suggest people check it out, take a look at it.
Yeah, there's a few here stories that I wanted to go over. I commented that on the YouTube, so if you're on YouTube or if you find the channel for this video, you'll see Aaron's comment there. I commented it, but you'll see the one that he's talking about here. All right, so a couple here disproportionately reported by the right and the left I think are interesting here. You got this one, Bill Clinton is open to talk about Biden about preemptively pardoning Hillary Clinton, because we're doing preemptive pardons now. In the case of Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden was not a great person in the classic sense. If you read Laptop from Hell, and I went in wanting to dislike Hunter Biden, you will feel very, very, very bad for Hunter Biden by the end of it. This man's only purpose for existence in his life from birth was to conceal money for his dad. Yeah. I mean, this is like literally the reason for his birth. And I'm not even kidding on that. Like, we're talking like from the get-go, things that we found that were just like, here's what we'll do. Bo is going to be the politician-y one. You're going to be the money laundery one. And this is the way that it's designed to work out for you. And to Hunter Biden's credit, he messed up sometimes. He did use the wrong account to make a payment for cocaine or prostitutes or something a few times, and that he had an FBI handler that would help him when he did those kind of things. But to his credit, whereas most people, the reason Joe Biden isn't in the trouble that he's in is because of Hunter Biden. Right. Hunter was really good. When somebody would be like, hey, listen, I want to get this thing pushed through. I'll give you $15 million. Hunter Biden was like, that's not how we phrase it. You pay $15 million. My dad might show up at this coffee shop, and whatever happens, happens. right?
Well, you know, that's
Now, Joe
interesting.
Biden saw all these conversations because he invented various names. The FBI has gone over this, but invented various names to like that were anonymous, but it was him so that he could see these conversations. So the reason that like Joe Biden isn't in trouble is because he threw Hunter Biden to the wolves. I believe Hunter Biden definitely deserves to be pardoned. His dad should be spending the rest of his life in prison, but Hunter Biden, you feel bad for him. Go ahead with what you were going to say.
I was going to say it's interesting to me that the difference between how Trump and Biden handle their various scandals, because as you mentioned, Biden kept it in the family, so to speak, whereas Trump, he develops these relationships with people who are utterly sycophantic to him, and they're willing to fall on the sword and go to prison to protect him, and he just casts them aside and moves on to the next person who's willing to do that for him. Whereas Biden, because he's kept it in the family, because he's used his children as patsies, he has to protect them to a certain extent. And he's just better at hiding his corruption than Trump is. Trump is openly corrupt and just challenges people to even like legally challenge him for it because he immediately makes it a political issue. Whereas Biden has relied on hiding most of his crimes and using his son as a proxy. Yeah. That's particularly interesting to me. But also on the Hunter Biden pardon specifically, I agree with your general analysis that Hunter has largely just been a victim his entire life. But politically speaking, when it comes to Hunter's pardon, I don't really care about the crime that Hunter is primarily. Obviously, there's larger ramifications for what the pardon is beyond just the
tax evasion and gun charge, both of which you and I would be like, those shouldn't be crimes, right?
Those shouldn't be crimes anyway.
Correct.
But yeah, obviously, that's more to it than that because of the time frame that Biden has done his pardon for. But the featured crime is a joke of a crime. But the problem is because of the way that he has gone about doing it, especially because he said he wasn't going to do it over and over and over and over and over. He said, I am not going to pardon my son. I am above that. I am a moral, upstanding individual. I would never do something so disgraceful, blah, blah, blah. And then he does it anyway. Trump is going to use the fact that Biden pardoned Hunter for a nonsense non-crime, and he's going to justify everything he does under his administration under that non-crime being pardoned. And that, to me, is way worse than the actual pardon itself. And the pardon itself is hardly even notable when you can factor in all of Biden's other crimes. I mean, the complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, to me, outweighs anything that Hunter Biden could have ever done. Hunter Biden could have been like regularly killing cats and dogs in his backyard just for fun. And that would be nothing compared to Gaza.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you said, it shouldn't be a crime, but it is. I think, unfortunately, the issue is, Trump is going to abuse this. I mean, Biden's abusing it. The reason this has been issued in the way that it has, because if he just usually a pardon is just saying the tax fraud thing and the gun thing, right?
Right.
Which would have been very low, but he's ending the investigation into it, right? Like there is no, all potential crimes that were committed. Joe Biden is protecting himself. He was very ready. I believe that Joe Biden actually had a change of heart, but it's more like a change of head. If his son was just going to jail for crime, for the tax thing and the gun thing, yeah, Joe Biden would have let it happen. But as soon as this all of a sudden becomes like, oh, this is your name, you've actually observed all of these attempted bribery things. Oh, you're part of this, right? Then all of a sudden, Joe Biden is like, well, this is going to put me in prison if we keep investigating this.
And the funny thing is Biden is so incredibly old. that he can't really be scared of actual prison. I think this is more of a nepotism, protecting my legacy sort of thing, which is funny because this is obviously going to be perceived as the hypocritical thing that it actually is. So he's tarnishing his legacy to save his legacy, which is like, cauterizing your arm after you've chopped it off so that the infection doesn't spread or whatever.
Yeah. It's that's possible too, because obviously with how old he is, he could probably delay until whatever. Maybe it's just a reputational protection, but this is Joe Biden is guilty. It's certainly money laundering. I think one of the things was I was reading Laptop from Hell, and I will say Laptop from Hell, it's written by a journalist. They're the only ones who have access to it. It is written by a right-wing journalist. There are enough direct quotes in it that you could scrap all of the commentary and just use the quotes, that it becomes very obvious that Joe Biden is just taking bribes and money laundering. And this doesn't make him unique among politicians. No, this is frankly how it's done. Everybody has a Hunter Biden in their life, like these politicians do. But, it's just particularly insidious when it's your own son. And Joe Biden was particularly, this is how he gained power, right? Like how is he like one of the youngest people and one of the oldest people ever in politics? There's some statistic, like he was like the third youngest and the fourth oldest person ever, like in total political office in this country. Like he is the institution. And the reason is because of things like this. He has thought everything through, and he is particularly insidious about it.
And as you said, he's not notable in any particular way, in the sense that like almost every single politician is this corrupt. And they're almost never actually caught for it, because you have to do stupid stuff like get gold bars and stuff them in your walls, like that one politician did that just recently got busted like a year ago or whatever. You know who I'm talking about? Yeah, I don't know his name. But yeah, you have to be that incredibly incompetent to be held responsible for your corruption as a politician in America. Most people are not that incompetent. They'll use, intermediaries to ferry messages, and they'll take their payment in oblique ways where it's less trackable and everything like that. And as long as you do stuff like that, you can openly grift as much as you possibly want. You could be as corrupt as possible. You could be Nancy Pelosi joking about how she insider trades and gets away with it, because she's Nancy Pelosi,
To this day, the Nancy Pelosi stock tracker is still the most successful AI tracker that you can get. So if you plan on playing the stock market, just do what Pelosi does, and she's good at it. All right, flipping over to the other side, stuff that the left's seeing that the right wing's not seeing. Trump did yesterday, announced that he plans on scrapping the policy which would stop ICE agents from arresting immigrants at churches, schools, and hospitals. Up to this point, at least still at this point, ICE has a policy not to arrest illegal immigrants while they're at churches, schools, and hospitals. Trump says he's going to get rough, quote on that, and start arresting immigrants that are at churches, hospitals, and schools. I have mentioned this before, that there are like 20-ish verses that say like this is how you're saved, and like 400 plus verses in the Bible that talk about treating immigrants well. This does not fall in the purview of treating immigrants well. This is about as unchristian as it gets. I should not be surprised, because when Donald Trump was asked to cite his favorite Bible verses or anything like that, it's clear he doesn't know what he's talking. What he called it, 2 Corinthians, right, instead of 2 Corinthians. Like he just has
he didn't like, when he was asked for his favorite Bible verse, he immediately obfuscated and said something to the effect of, "Oh, I don't want to pick any particular one." Like it was more of those things like, "Oh, there's too many. I can't possibly name them all." Where it's like you clearly not even know one. So
if you look him up, he's had this happen twice. Once of which was during a town hall, but he did it again like later during an interview. It is the most like, my teacher asked me like what's in the book and I didn't read the book. Like, and I would think like it's one thing to just not read the book, but it's another thing to like, I think as a Christian, if I were to try to fake being a Christian, and somebody would be like, what's your favorite part of the Bible? I would at least be able to be like, I love where Jesus feeds people or something, right? Like, make it up, right? Like, enough to at least make that up. Trump doesn't even know enough about that to lie about it. Like,
an absolutely legendary thing that a reporter could do once he's in office and they have the opportunity to ask him questions is get up and say, Mr. President Trump, can you answer what is John 3:16? Just ask him that, apropos of nothing, because it would reveal, like, that's
his Aleppo.
That would be his Aleppo, because like everyone, you don't even have to be a Christian, everyone knows John 3:16, and him, not answering that question would be fantastic.
Trump is listen, it's up to God. God judges people's hearts. I'm not even saying that he's not like a Christian or something. He's not practicing. And this is evidence of it here. And this is just one of those that, like, Christians have when you talk about Christian persecution, it's not happy holidays. This is Christian persecution. This is what it looks like when the state is able to.
I was going to say, ironically, most of these people that are going to be arrested, these illegal immigrants, are Catholic as a result of cultural, coming over to America thinking it's going to be a land for better opportunity. And they're going to be arrested by the Christian president, Trump.
Right. At their church while they're practicing
at their church.
Right? Like, exactly. They're actively participating in their faith and being arrested while they're practicing their faith. People have a right to seek out better lives for themselves. Politicians have absolutely no right to restrict you from peacefully seeking a better life from you and your family. Immigration is so fundamental to the Bible. Like, I have a tough time thinking of any single subject where there's more than 500 verses or 400 verses about it, right? Like, and why? Why is the Bible so big on immigration? Because this is your neighbor. Like, the most foreign people among you are your neighbors. This is it. From the Old Testament through the New Testament, this is a theme that stays true. And we just have to get this right. And the idea that Christianity could be even twisted to be like slightly anti-immigrant is wrong. The fact that it's gone this far, it just shows, like, there's that saying that a lot of Christians don't like reading the Bible, and this is it. This is the proof, right? Like, that Christians don't like reading the Bible. You really can't defend any of this. I mean, ICE is bad enough. They're a terrorist organization, like, in every definition that you could provide for a terrorist. Like, we're talking sexual assailants of people who try to immigrate correctly, by the way, who show up declaring legal asylum. Sexual assaults, and when there is a sexual assault, what do? Instead of they just move them around to a different section of the facility, right? Whenever there's a big thing about it. Separating families, doing as bad a job as they can possibly do. The conditions at the border are as bad as they have ever been. They are worse than they were 8 years ago, 3 years ago. Things are getting terrible, and things are already bad enough. We do not need more ICE agents arresting people that are trying to pray, or arresting somebody who's in a hospital, who's in the middle of a medical procedure, or who's somebody's at his school. I mean, we're talking about kids, right? Now we're talking about kids. This is a school, and this is their policy not to do it.
They're
Trump
talking
is
about,
like, I'm just changing
retroactively removing birthright citizenship from U.S. citizens. Yeah.
Even if you're not a Christian, that's just unconstitutional, right? Isn't that the 14th Amendment? 14th Amendment? Yeah.
Yep.
14th Amendment. Like,
he's openly talked about how he wants to get rid of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
It's so evil. Bad. It's almost not worth even talking about, because
I don't know what analysis I have here. It's just evil.
You don't answer that level of evil with words. You answer it with guns. But you
defend
can't say
yourselves,
that.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, defend yourselves. I don't, and honestly, don't even defend yourselves. Defend your loved ones. Defend those around you. Defend your neighbors. Right. This is as much as I'm talking about this is what Christian persecution looks like, defend your neighbors, like practice your faith. Practicing your faith in this case is, what did you do for the least of these when stuff like this was going down? Did you shut up? Were you quiet? Did you let it happen? Did you even encourage it to happen? Or did you intervene, right? Did you say no?
When you read Anne Frank and you're like, well, what would I do in the Holocaust? Well, you're about to find out. You're about to find out what you would do in the Holocaust.
Yep. This is your moment, right? This is your moment. We've had Texas openly go against, openly prosecuting Christian churches that are serving immigrants. And we're just talking like food and shelter, place to stay, right? Like, and shutting down those churches at this point, literally hundreds of churches at this point by the state of Texas. In Ohio, this has begun. Those are the ones that I've seen on like the news. The thing is the threat of it exists for all of them, all churches. But there are states that are actively going about it. And now you have a president that says, yep, we're going to do this like at a national level. So beyond even your state doing this, you're now going to have your nation persecuting you for your faith. And this is literally a practice. There is more tradition to protecting immigrants than like practicing the Passover. I mean, cannot be understated. Cannot be understated. Can't be overstated. Can't be overstated how core loving immigrants is to your faith. Anyhow, I saw this story and it makes me sick every time
I hadn't even heard of it
like that. Yeah.
But that's one last segue before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Ground News as an institution. How do you feel about it?
So far, I'm liking them. I was gifted an annual subscription for 1 year, and by my secret Santa. So I thank them for that. We're supposed to do $40. I believe this is like $100, but I think there's a plan where they can get it for half off or something. Okay. So they said they gave it to me for $50, and it's in the ballpark of what the gifts we're supposed to give our family members. At the moment, I really like it. I like that. So what I can do here is I'll click on this here. I haven't even seen this one. Jill Biden's remarks about joy. It'll give you the groups that actually reported it here. So not one left-wing organization has reported it yet. And if I actually want to see the reporting on this, I can actually click, I can actually click this. It opens it in a separate tab. And actually with StreamYard, I can hit share this tab instead. And now you're looking at that source itself. So it's cool if I want to see like a single news story, and then it gathers all the stories that are there, and I want to read from all those different sources. You know what I mean?
I guess my big question is, I get constant advertisements from the YouTube's videos that I watch for Ground News, and so far I haven't bit the bullet. Like, I got constant advertisements to go to Nebula.
Okay.
And I have initially bit the bullet, and I've been a member of Nebula now, and I enjoy it quite a bit. And it's something that I would actually spend money on. My question is, once your subscription expires, do you expect you're going to renew it?
I have had it so I would have done this last week if I had it last week. I've had it for, I think, 4 days on the 8th. So 3 days. And I don't know. I think I want to play around with this some more. I think a lot of this is going to depend if I have one, for example, that has like links to the New York Times articles, but like I don't have a Times subscription, and that it doesn't override that, right? Like I can't.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, like it's not like an automatic subscription to the New York Times as well. You know, like if I click on this Toronto Sun one,
it's going to get you a paywall.
Yeah, and then it's like I've got that ad blocker. Yeah, it's still not going to love that. So yeah, there's just stuff that I still got to navigate. It's not, I think it's good. I am really big on understanding what my left-wing friends are watching and what my right-wing friends are watching. And because I have friends from both, and I want to be able to speak to them in a way that they understand. Obviously, that's like a biblical principle that we talk about here a lot. Like I want to be able to speak to them in a way that they understand. And so being able to see the news that they've likely seen helps me be kind of caught off guard less. I can't say that Ground News necessarily, because I've been doing this already. So I I'm decent about this. Ground news, I think, will make it easier. I think with that, what I need to do is put this into practice more. And if all my left-winger friends that, are like, I've never heard that story. And ground news is like, oh, I'm sure they've heard that story. I might be like, well, maybe it's, if it's not.
I hadn't heard the ice story that you brought up. That one caught me off guard.
Yeah. And it should. So it's actually this tab here. And this has been my favorite tab so far, called Blind Spot. Yeah. And it's this one that, like, stories that aren't getting a lot of traction from either the left or the right disproportionately. So a lot of these are stories that I'll have seen before, but only because I watched CNN or Fox or something like that, or more of my news ones. And so it's nice having them kind of all in one place, that are going all in one place. Like, so like if I were to do good news, Montana Supreme Court upholds a lower court ruling that allows minors to receive gender affirming care. Now, you'd think this would be a left-wing story because it's celebratory, but the right gets angry about it, and so they report it, right?
Right.
Similarly here, the left-wing reporting outrage, because we've got over here this. I heard this story. They're creating in Washington. They're proposing creating a whole league. So there's men's divisions, women's divisions, and they're just proposing an open division. So you can be whatever you want and participate in this division in sports. And this is part of that concession we talked about when they lost the election. And the very next day, those two Congress people were like, hey, maybe we need to kind of capitulate on, transgender in sports and everything like that. Like, this is the fruit of that.
Right.
Of them proposing, just a different division. So, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. If Nebula works for you, I wouldn't want to sell you this over anything else.
Well, Nebula's, it's entirely distinct from this. So this is a news aggregate, and Nebula is more of just like YouTube but premium, like YouTube but exclusive.
Okay.
So it's just a place where people can post things. Well, first of all, things that, like, they can talk directly about topics like suicide and mental health and everything like that. Whereas if you say the word suicide on YouTube, they get super. I just realized you're streaming on YouTube. I probably shouldn't.
I'm not worried about it. None of our viewers are currently watching on YouTube right now, and I am so suppressed on Facebook and YouTube that it's just. I would rather talk about what I'm going to talk about and let the world censor me than not talk about these things. I already talked about sexual assault. I said sexual assault instead of calling it SA. I know I can say SA.
There you go. Yeah. I was going to say, on Nebula, you can talk about topics openly without having to worry about YouTube throwing the damn hammer down,
That's good. That's big. I mean, especially with like the Love First Christians. That's what I always try to like push, is that, like, if you have a question where you wouldn't ordinarily feel comfortable asking it in church, like, ask it here, like, this is the right place to do it. Like, here's one: 14 right-wing sources reported this, and 0 left and center reported this. West Point apologized for sharing inaccurate Pete Hegseth information. Like, I think that's fascinating to me, that, like, there are just certain news stories that you just aren't going to know about entirely. Like, if you just have your go-to news sources,
Right.
And it's like, I mean, obviously that does mean I still need to scrutinize all of these. One of the things that I hate, man, we talk about the Hunter Biden laptop story. I hate that everybody who's allowed to view it is right-wing. If they're talking about it, they're right-wing. And if they're left-wing and they were allowed to view it, they won't talk about it. So I have no choice but to, like, trust the right-wing, and I don't. You know what I mean? So, like, I can only go off of quotes that are quotes and hope for the best that they're, like, real actual quotes. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
What a nightmare that is. Like, whenever there's a story like that happens. The Kayla Lemieux, remember, she was that transgender girl in Canada, but she ended up probably not being transgender, right? Like, it was that guy who was dressing up with the Z cup prosthetic boobs.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And, like, they got a picture of him. I'm not trying to misgender anybody, but, like,
I'm pretty sure I remember that story is that person wasn't transgender. They were just trying to create a public disturbance.
Correct, right? And just, like, the only people who reported that story was the right wing. And like, I hated that, because the truth is I wanted information about it. but it's not like the left-wing media felt like I couldn't be trusted to even know about it. It had to be a total blanket censorship, right? Like anybody who was looking into Kayla Lemieux was a right-winger, and that's it, you know?
It's frustrating because it's like, if you give attention to that, you're opening a can of worms for people who, okay, so like if you're left of center and you're in charge of a news station and you want to promote things that foster intellectual discussion, but also pursue the goal of progressive politics, if you bring this individual into the national spotlight by covering them, you're exposing an audience of people who wouldn't have normally learned about this person's existence to this person. And you're inherently, if you don't set the framing just right, you could just completely alienate a whole bunch of people against progressive causes, because they're not willing to learn about the fact that this individual is just a performance troll. Like they're not seeking to get. I think that they had like some sort of mental illness or something like that, and they weren't trans. They were just trying to seek, lash out. I don't remember the exact story exactly, but
Kayla said that she had I think even said like a tumor, but basically a condition that made her breast grow like that, right? But then you saw the picture without the prosthetics on of that guy. And so I just have to assume that it's like, I'm not saying that a person who looked like a guy can't be trans. I want to be as respectful as I can to my trans friends, right? Like, super welcome here with the Love First Christians. I'm all for you, all for your rights. I think it's great. Like I mentioned, the Montana, thing of Supreme Court allowing you to get the surgery, like, for minors, and not just surgery, but treatment, right? Like all that. But it is this person specifically that I don't know how to gender them, because they are caught in a lie, right? And it's like, I don't want to. Is it demeaning to trans people if I call him her by even associating with that person with being transgender, right? Like, I almost want to call him, even though he says he's her, because he's lied about his whole persona, right? Like the whole thing. Like, he's not actually being genuine about it. Like, at the very least, lying about the boobs,
it's a little bit more sophisticated, just a little bit more sophisticated than when Steven Crowder would do the performances as a woman. Where it's like obviously, incredibly obviously insincere from the get-go. And his performance was a little bit more genuine than that.
Right. Different than being non-passing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, Aaron, thank you for spending like an extra hour with me today, man. I did not mean to do that.
But I really enjoyed this topic, so this was great.
It was a good one. I'm glad we got to talk about it all. Everybody, there is a link to the Love First Christians if you want to join us in the comments here. If you want to be part of Aaron's book club, you can find him at Aaron Goss on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, I'm also on Twitter, but I barely use it. But you could message me there, and I'll redirect you to something that I actually use.
There you go. And you'll find your way to that. So if you want to the book club and read about the Weather Underground or any of other fine books, feel free to join us. Anyhow, till next time, guys, have a blessed week, and we'll talk to you later.